Right, hello everyone. So I would like in this video to talk about the Second World War, and I would like to present to you the idea that Winston Churchill did not start the Second World War. This video is a response to the dissident right and to the alt-right and to the neo-Nazis on the internet, who seem to be of the opinion that Winston Churchill is evil because he started the Second World War and therefore he destroyed the white race. I believe that this is a complete mistake. In my opinion, it was Moustache Man that started the Second World War by invading Austria and by breaking the Treaty of Versailles. And I think that this is very obvious for anybody who has an intelligent view of history. And in my opinion, the secret neo-Nazi movement, which is the dissident right, has caused great harm to England and to British nationalism by mixing the subject matter of English nationalism and English ethno-nationalism with neo-Nazism. Because what they have done is they have monopolized the subject matter of the you-know-whos and race realism on the internet. And so when English people become concerned about what's going on in the world and when they want to know answers, they encounter the dissident right, they encounter this secret neo-Nazi movement, and then they get brainwashed into this cult. They will end up watching Dennis Wise's The Greatest Story Never Told, or The Battle for Europa, and they will come to the conclusion that Moustache Man was innocent, he didn't do anything wrong, and Churchill was the bad guy. And by coming to this conclusion, they turn against their own country. And by doing this, they kill the baby of English ethno-nationalism in the womb. So I think that this is very destructive and very dangerous, and in this video I would like to present to you all of my arguments, just the complete range of arguments against Moustache Man in defense of Winston Churchill, and I will present this to you in the form of a Socratic dialogue, in the form of a back and forth between me and a neo-Nazi, because this is the kind of conversation that I have on Twitter all the time with neo-Nazis if they're actually interested in discussing this subject matter. And I also just think it's just the best way to outline these ideas. Otherwise, I could just sit here and ramble to myself about what I think. So usually these conversations on the internet start with me writing in a comment section somewhere, Churchill did not start the Second World War. And then there's an entire flow of conversation which goes up and down and round and backwards and forwards and etc., etc. So I thought that would be the best place to start. I also think that this question, Churchill did not start the Second World War, or you could phrase it like a question. Please tell me how Churchill started the Second World War. Kind of like the way Matt Walsh asked such a brilliant question, what is a woman? But this statement in itself is it's the best solution to the neo-Nazi problem. Because neo-Nazism is absolutely 100% founded on the idea that Moustache Man is innocent. And once you realize that he's not, once you realize that he was the aggressive one, their entire ideology just crumbles to pieces. So let's just make it really crystal clear right at the beginning. I am an ethno-nationalist. I wish to create an England for the English and a Britain for the British. I wish to kick all the foreigners out. And I am also fully aware of the you-know-whos. I'm fully aware of America's greatest ally. I mean, the question of the you-know-whos is obviously a very, very deep and fascinating one. But if anybody's watching this and they don't understand this question, it's very simple to understand. It's basically, America is the most powerful nation in the world, still to this day. It's got military bases all across the world. Everybody follows its language and its culture and its economy. And America's greatest ally is Israel. And you are not allowed to criticize the Israelis, and you are not allowed to criticize the Zionist lobby, and you are not allowed to talk about the you-know-whos, and you're not allowed to talk about AIPAC, and you're not allowed to talk about who runs the ADL. And if you do talk about these things, then your political career will be destroyed, your business career will be destroyed, your journalist career will be destroyed, and you will be pushed out of the mainstream. So who is really in charge? Well, we all know that quote by Voltaire. Apparently it's not even a real quote, but whatever. If you want to know who's in charge, just look and see who you are not allowed to criticize. And you're not allowed to criticize the you-know-whos. That's why I call them the you-know-whos, right? Because they run Google, they run YouTube, they run Facebook, they run WhatsApp, they run Instagram, and they're very powerful, and they tolerate no criticism, and it's really, really straightforward and obvious to see this. I mean, if you want to look at it another way, you could look at the neocons. Okay, the neocon movement was started by the you-know-whos. It's come to dominate American politics. Both Republican and essentially Democrats as well are neocons at this point. Even though they may not class themselves as neocons, they are. And they do whatever Israel wants. And they give all their money to Israel. And look at Nikki Haley and look at the things that she is saying. So this really is not a difficult question to answer. So I just thought I'd say all that to make this clear. I am not against ethno-nationalism. I am not a civic nationalist. I'm aware of race realism. I'm aware of the you-know-who question. I have been involved in the alt-right and the dissident right for many years. When I say many years, I mean since 2016, the great meme war of 2016. But I got fed up with the movement because it was so anti-English and because it was so retarded. Their support of Moustache Man was just obviously stupid. And it's obvious to anyone that the British public are never, ever, ever, ever going to rally behind Germany. And the leaders of the dissident right themselves, they know this. This is why they don't openly declare this. And this is why they don't openly talk about the Second World War. They always say, oh, we need to step over it. And that's bad optics. We shouldn't discuss it. And so what they've transformed themselves into basically is a cult. They believe that they are right. They believe in their historical interpretation of what has happened, and they will not tolerate criticism of it. And they, generally speaking, will not discuss it, not openly. And so it just becomes this core belief which is in the back of their head that goes unquestioned. And so they continue on with their secret neo-Nazism. And then they wonder why they fail year after year after year. They wonder why the National Front failed. They wonder why the BNP failed. They wonder why the alt-right failed. They wonder why the patriotic alternative is failing. Well, it's failing because they're secret neo-Nazis, and the British public are disgusted by secret neo-Nazis, and they're never going to follow them. And my solution to this problem is to stop being secret neo-Nazis and to embrace Winston Churchill and to celebrate the fact that we fought the Second World War and to celebrate English history and to create an English ethno-nationalism which the British public will actually rally behind. That is what I'm attempting to do with my YouTube channel and with this video. And it's my belief that this is of fundamental importance not just for England but for the entire world, really, for the entirety of Western civilization, because I don't think, well, the Europeans are not going to figure this out. The Americans are not going to figure this out because they've all got a chip on their shoulder. They've got certain anti-Englishness about them because they've got daddy issues because of the American Revolutionary War. I suppose a Canadian or an Australian or a New Zealander, perhaps they could understand it. They're more in tune with Anglosphere politics. But whatever the case, England is the world's most influential nation in the modern world. The whole world follows our language, our culture, our science, and although we have lost our physical power in this world, we still have a great soft power. People still look to us for leadership and inspiration. So if we're going to fix this problem of clown world and the you-know-whos and race realism and white genocide and all of these things, we have to solve it philosophically in this country first. It has to be an Englishman which stands up against it and resolves it and speaks the truth about what actually happened in the Second World War, because I just don't think an American has the ability to think it through and to see through it, to be honest with you. And it's America that's destroying the world right now with its woke culture and its transgenderism and its promotion of hyper-individualism and mass immigration and all of this. It's America that's destroying the world, and America is our colony. And we are the only group of people that can really bring it, bring it under control and fix it. We can't really expect the Americans to fix it for themselves when they've divorced themselves from their own history, because they got daddy issues. So we, as Englishmen, we need to fix ourselves. And once we've fixed ourselves, we can fix America. And once we've fixed America, we can fix the world. That's the plan. But in order to do that, we must cast off this neo-Nazi nonsense. We must cast it off. And in order to do that, we have to have a very serious think about what actually happened in the Second World War. So let's get into this. Again, let's do this as a Socratic dialogue. Let's imagine we're on Twitter. There's some neo-Nazi, and he posts some neo-Nazi nonsense. What is the response? Well, there are two possible responses. One response is the more rational response, which is going to be the title of this video, which is Churchill did not start the war. But there's another deeper response, which is, I don't even care if Churchill started the war or not. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to apologize for anything. I stand for my own team and my own country. Right? That is what I like to call the psychological argument. So there are two arguments that I have in defense of Churchill. The psychological argument, which is that we have to play for our own team, and the historical argument, which is the fact that Churchill did not start the war. Let's start with the psychological argument first, because it's the most powerful, because it's totally undeniable. So basically, the psychological argument is the idea that we as a nation have to defend our warriors and our heroes and our history from any kind of attack from outsiders. Because if we allow a criticism and a critique of our culture and our history and our people, if we allow this to dig in, then other people will use this history and this critique of us in order to destroy us. So essentially, the idea, to put that in more simplistic terms, the idea comes, let's say you have a son and he asks you about the Second World War. What do you say? If you say to your son, Moustache Man good and Churchill bad, right? If you say, I wish we never got involved in that war, or I wish we lost the war, which is what a lot of secret neo-Nazis say, I wish Germany had won, then essentially you are saying Moustache Man good, Churchill bad, which translates into Germany good, England bad, which translates into they are good, I am bad. It is psychologically damaging. It is psychologically undermining. And I say this because I believe that history is fundamentally subjective, and I believe in a triumphalist history. And what I mean by that is that I believe that history should be a story that is told in order to inspire your people to success. It should inspire your people to greatness, to conquer, to spread, to succeed and to thrive. That is why it should be triumphalist by nature, and that is why we should avoid too much criticism. Some criticism is okay, but too much is poison. Some criticism is necessary and good, but too much is poison. And I would say to you, there is a world of difference between, for example, the criticism of Peter Hitchens, who wrote a book recently called The Phony War. And in that book, he was very critical of some of the things that Winston Churchill did. But I can tolerate his criticism because I know that Peter Hitchens is a nationalist. He loves England. But if a secret neo-Nazi, some e-celeb from the internet, is criticizing Churchill, it's coming from a totally different angle. Or if an American is criticizing Churchill, it's coming from a totally different angle. It's coming from an angle that is anti-English. So two people can say the same things, and in a subtle way, there can be a different meaning underneath this. And this is why I say history is fundamentally subjective. Why? Because this entire world is an endless, ongoing war and a struggle for survival between different nations and different people. And this all goes back to a man whose name is Thomas Malthus, and he wrote a book after the French Revolution called Principles of Population. He is well known for being the first person to talk about there being an overpopulation problem. And he is often quoted by people like Alex Jones or David Icke and so on and so forth as being some horribly evil person. But actually he wasn't. He was just stating a very basic fact. And that fact is that men have sexual desire and they will fulfill their sexual desire. And the result of that sexual desire is going to be the creation of children. And we will always have more children than we can feed. And so Malthus's conclusion was that population will either be controlled by misery or by vice. And he's 100% correct. By misery, he means war, starvation, disease, drought, things like this. And by vice, he means homosexuality, contraception, or various other ways of abstaining from sexual intercourse. So, and this is true. And in our modern world, we can see that people seem to favor vice. They seem to favor contraception as the means of control. But whatever the case, the underlying point, which Malthus didn't really say in his book, but the underlying point is that because he didn't approach the subject matter from a nationalistic point of view, he was just talking about people in general. But the conclusion that you come to once you understand this is that, well, different nations will struggle for resources. They will struggle for land so that they can grow food, so that they can feed their population. This world is a struggle. There is no equilibrium. And people will suffer because there's not enough to eat. There's not enough to go around. And that's a basic fact. And this is a fact which has been demonized to a certain extent because, you know, globalists like Bill Gates and so on and so forth, they obviously have a depopulation agenda. And so people like to point at them and say, well, you're wrong, there's enough room for everybody. But there isn't. We cannot live in a world that's got 100 billion people on it, or 200 billion, or 500 billion. Like, you have to draw the line somewhere. At some point, there's not enough room and there's not enough to eat. And so what is the solution to this? The solution is warfare between nations. The solution is obviously that people will group together and they will work together in their own interest to get the food, right? Endless warfare, endless struggle for resources. That is the nature of this world. And it's a harsh truth, and most people don't want to accept it. Malthus himself didn't really lay this out, but he did make it clear in his book that this has all been arranged by God. He was a holy man. I think he may have been some kind of priest or vicar or something, but he was a Christian. And he made the point that this is God's arrangement. This is how the world is made. And this is why people struggle for virtue and struggle for greatness in order to overcome the suffering of this world. But this world is a place of suffering, and that's for sure. So why am I saying all this? Because Malthus, most ethno-nationalists don't realize this and don't understand this, but whatever the case, he is really the father of the eugenics movement. He's the father of ethno-nationalism. He's the father of all of it. Arthur de Gobineau, I probably messed that name up, but the French guy, who was actually the first real ethno-nationalist, he wrote what he wrote in a way, and as a continuation of the thoughts that were started by Malthus. Darwin, I don't believe in Darwin, but he wrote as a continuation of the thoughts of Malthus. The questions that Malthus asked were still being discussed and chewed over 100 years later. So we all live in his shadow. There's not enough food. So why am I making this argument? What's this got to do with the Second World War? Well, again, the neo-Nazi says, right, the secret neo-Nazi on the internet, he wants to say Germany good, Churchill bad. Well, if you start saying Churchill bad, you're only one step away from saying England bad. And you can say, well, it doesn't mean that. Well, I'm sorry, but first of all, I've just seen it happen. I've seen it happen on the internet. I've seen people, they start saying, oh yeah, Churchill, oh, he's bad. Oh no. Next thing you know, they're saying the British Empire is bad, because Churchill, of course, was acting to defend the British Empire. So now they're anti-imperialist. Next thing they're saying that England's been controlled by the you-know-whos for a long time and they were never acting in our interests. Next thing you know, they've converted to Catholicism and they're saying, oh, the whole Reformation was bad. And next thing you know, they're glorifying German idealism and German culture. And even great thinkers like Jonathan Bowden have fell for this. Bowden himself said, Germany is the heart of Europe. And it's like, well, excuse me, I'm English. England conquered the world. The whole world speaks our language. The whole world speaks our culture. The British Empire is the greatest expression of European power in this world, because it is. Europe conquered the entire world. But which empire did it the best? Which empire was number one? The British Empire. So now you're in a position where instead of celebrating all of that, which is obviously the natural rallying point for our people, now you're groveling on the floor and apologizing for it and looking to Germany for inspiration. It makes no sense at all. But underlying all of this, the point I'm trying to get at is that once you allow foreigners to attack our culture, then you start apologizing, then you're psychologically broken, then you start to question your own history, then you're starting to look to other people's history for inspiration, then you forget your own history, and then you're destroyed. So history has to be triumphalist. We have to carry our own flag. If we don't do this, we'll be wiped out. So history is subjective. I mean, just to make this really crystal clear, if I was German, I would support Moustache Man. 100%. 150%. And I would take all the facts of the Second World War and I'd twist them all round and I'd jumble them all round in order to make Germany the innocent one. But I'm not German. I'm English. And I will fight for my own team. And that is a hill that I will die on. And I say to you, good people of the internet, that if you've turned against Churchill, you've turned against your own country, and you are a traitor if you're English. You may think, oh, it's harmless. It's not harmless. It's totally destructive. Let me give you another example. Stalin, right? The neo-Nazi, right? Just to try and continue this as a Socratic debate. But anyway, the neo-Nazi in response to all this might say, what about Stalin? You saying he's a hero? Yeah, I am actually. And Stalin was a monster. Stalin was a horrible monster who threw people into the gulags and shot. I mean, I don't need to explain this, what kind of a psychopath that man was. He was a bad man. But if your country is being invaded by Nazis who want to kill and genocide Slavic people so they can have their living space, then you're going to want a man like Stalin on your side. A man who is utterly uncompromising and willing to sacrifice millions to rescue the country. So is he a monster? Yes. Is he Russia's monster and Russia's hero? Yes, in a similar way that Ivan the Terrible was their monster. In a similar way to us, that Henry VIII was a little bit of a monster. The abolition of the monasteries, a lot of wealth wasted. But he did it in defense of his country. Now you may say to that, well, hang on a minute, what about Zelensky? He's slaughtering so many Ukrainians in the defense of Ukraine. Is he a hero? Well, no. Because Putin doesn't want to genocide the Ukraine. He just wants to conquer it. And most Ukrainians are Russian anyway, and they were living under Russian rule for a long, long time. So it's a totally different kettle of fish. It's not the same thing. And then the neo-Nazi may say, well, what about Tony Blair? Is Tony Blair a monster? Is Tony Blair a hero? He fought in the Gulf War. So by he got us involved in all of that. He waged war against the world. So by your reckoning, he should be celebrated as some kind of martial warrior. Well, the answer is no. Why? Not because I'm apologizing for Iraq. I don't care about Iraq. I don't care about dead Iraqi children. I don't care. When it comes to Iraq, I think it was a blunder that destabilized the Middle East, and it was done for Israel, and it was unnecessary, and it was a waste of time and money. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm just going to say it's a mistake, which is a different thing. But that war in itself was just some poxy Third World War off in the middle of nowhere. It's not something it wasn't a life or death battle for destruction like the Second World War. Tony Blair should be condemned for inviting in mass immigration, essentially. That's why he should be condemned. Of course, the neo-Nazi, in response to that, he'll say, well, Churchill never stopped the immigration. And yeah, you're right, he didn't. That's probably the worst thing that he did out of all of his blunders. He didn't. But nonetheless, we are still living in the shadow of the Second World War. And he is the guy who stood up to Moustache Man and to Germany and tried to defend the British Empire. That's what he represents. He is our hero. We still live in that shadow. And if you want to tear him down, you're going to tear down the whole of British culture with it. That's it. You have now pitted yourself against the gammon. The gammon that love the royal family. They love the flag. They love the British Empire. They love Churchill. And that's it. And now you're playing a different tune. Very much like two pitchforks. Okay, so if you get a pitchfork, you ring it, ding, and it makes a noise. Let's say it's a C. If you have a similar pitchfork sitting there next to it, it will also ring, even though they're not touching. Why? Because the vibrations are on the same frequency. So, but if you're a neo-Nazi and you're singing one tune, you are now out of tune with the rest of the country. You are psychologically displaced. You are not singing from the same song sheet. And you won't notice it until you come back in the tune. I remember feeling a great sense of relief when I finally gave up on this Moustache Man nonsense. And all of a sudden I felt I was able to enjoy British culture and British thought more. Whereas before that time I was very much against it. And we see that this is the way the dissident right works. They like to hurl abuse. Hurl abuse at Sargon of Akkad. Oh, you stupid Sivnat. Even though Sargon of Akkad is completely against immigration. Hurl abuse at Nigel Farage, Richard Tice and Reform. Even though they're also against immigration. Hurl abuse at GB News. Hurl abuse at the stupid gammon. The secret neo-Nazis of the dissident right have a hatred of England. Why? Because they love Germany. They don't love England anymore. They've stepped away. They've been brainwashed by an internet cult. That's what happens when you turn against Churchill. Because we still live in the shadow of that war. And we will continue to live in the shadow of that war until there's another great war which rejumbles and refigures the entire world. In essence, what the neo-Nazis are doing is they're telling us to feel guilty for winning the war and feel guilty for Dresden. Whereas in the mainstream, people are told that they have to hate Moustache Man, and they have to grovel and apologize for the shower rooms. People in the white nationalist movement, in the dissident right, people are told that they have to hate Churchill, and they have to grovel and apologize for Dresden. Dresden is the worst thing that ever happened, ever, in the history of the world. You have to apologize. And again, this is made even worse because there are so many Americans that get involved in this. So many American Nazis. And they come on the internet and they interact with British Nazis. And Americans hate the English. A lot of them do. They got a chip on their shoulder. It's very much part of American patriotism to say, yeah, 1776, we beat the British. Freedom, America. It's part of their culture. Most English people just kind of ignore it or aren't really aware of it, because there is definitely a love-hate relationship there. Some of them love us, but a lot of them hate us as well. And so this gets mixed with neo-Nazism, and then you interact with these people on the internet, and then they're like, fuck Churchill, and you guys did Dresden, and England they are the you-know-whos of Europe, and they deserve everything they get, and And you have English people groveling and apologizing for this on the internet. It's disgusting. It's utterly pathetic. Imagine being an English man and apologizing for Dresden to an American. Like, how low can you fall? But this is the situation we've got in the dissident right. It's a total psyop, in my opinion. It's being pushed forward by the you-know-whos, and it's being done to cripple English nationalism, and it's being done deliberately. And we all know this because we know that the dissident right is filled with you-know-whos. And I'm not going to mention names in this video. I've done this many times in other places. I'm going to try and keep this video clean of all that. But these people are lying to you. The leaders, the e-celebs, they are lying. They are in bed with the you-know-whos. They have promoted these people on their live streams and so on and so forth. And if you're involved with this movement for any period of time, you'll know this. So let me put it to you this way. We all know, right, that famous saying by Lenin, if you want to control the resistance, you have to lead the resistance. Well, obviously, the you-know-whos control and they lead the dissident right. And what do? They tell English people to support Moustache Man. And they sell them a false version of history. And they do this because they know that this will alienate them from the British public. And they know that this will prevent them from getting organized and prevent them from achieving anything. And this is why if you interact with these people on the internet, they're so disgustingly rude and aggressive, and generally they react to any kind of criticism with just slander. And this is why the dissident right is so full of gossip and so full of infighting. And so, people committing or thinking about doing bad things and ending up in jail and falling out, and it's endless. Why? Because the entire dissident right is just filled with you-know-whos. It's quite obvious. Zelensky is a you-know-who, right? And and the Ukraine's full of neo-Nazis. And what happened there? Well, they took over the country and, almost started a third world war. It's quite obvious, isn't it, really? Let's think about it another way. Let's look at Greece, right? They have a neo-Nazi movement there. It's called the Golden Dawn. Imagine being Greek and joining the Golden Dawn, right? Imagine that. Moustache Man invaded Greece, killed so many Greek soldiers, and raped God knows how many Greek women. And yet, 70, 80 years later, you got Greek men worshipping him. Do you think the Greek people will ever rally behind that in a million years? Well, obviously not. It's a controlled op. Same goes for France. Same goes for various different countries in the world and in Europe. So it's a psyop. It's a controlled opposition psyop. That is what it is. It's the boogeyman. It's done in part in combination with Hollywood, who has helped to create the idea of the neo-Nazi, and it's been done to criticize, to kill nationalism in the womb. Kill it. Because then you can point and you can say, look at those guys with the swastikas. And most people on the dissident right realize this, and they understand it, which is, or at least they realize that the optics are bad. They realize that people will reject it. So they step away from the bad optics, but whilst doing that, they also step away from any debate about the Second World War. Andrew Anglin is a perfect example of this. Like, his entire website is called Daily Stormer, which is named after Der Stormer, which was a famous German propaganda paper. And he has rejected all the symbols of neo-Nazism, but he's not rejected neo-Nazism itself, because he still thinks that Moustache Man is innocent, and he still thinks that Churchill started the war. So he hasn't rejected that premise, and this is the problem here. You have this sanitized, cleaned up, secret neo-Nazism, which pretends not to be a neo-Nazi, but you've only got to look a little bit under the surface, and you'll see these people on the internet saying, oh, at least we're not all speaking German, things like this, and dog whistling. And so you can't hide it. You can't hide your neo-Nazism. And I've got more respect for neo-Nazis that are just boldly, openly neo-Nazi with the swastika and the whole thing, because at least they're being honest. And if you're being honest and you're being straightforward and you're telling the truth, then we can have a discussion about things. And if you can have a discussion about things, then you can move forwards on your path of knowledge. But if you have a belief in your head that you will never discuss because you think it's bad optics to talk about it, then you'll never question that belief. And if you never question that belief, you're never going to get it resolved, and you're never going to get through it and get over it. And this, I think, also the you-know-whos know this, which is why they bitterly will shut down any kind of discussion of the subject matter. It's very clever. It's a very clever, controlled opposition psyop, but that is what it is. So coming back to my Socratic dialogue, which I'm trying to stick to. I may go off rambling a little bit, but anyway, let's try and stick with it. Right, so in response to all this, the neo-Nazi might say that, well, England should have just stayed out of the war. It would have been in England's best interests, okay, because we've established this point now. England has a right to act in its own interests. So the neo-Nazi may say that it would have been in England's interests to just stay out of the war and to just allow Moustache Man and allow Germany to just conquer Europe. And then we wouldn't have had any problem. And this is the other major position that the neo-Nazis would take. Essentially, they either say they wish that Germany had won the war and conquered us, or they wish that we just stayed out of the war altogether. So the problem with this is that this will very rapidly transform into an anti-imperialist position. And what I mean by that is that people that propose this kind of argument, they seem to forget that at that period of time, we ruled the world. We were the world's number one superpower. We dominated the seas. We had the most powerful navy in the world. And Germany was competing with us to conquer the seas, essentially. And if we had allowed Germany to just conquer Europe, then we would have been next. And in response to that, the Nazis might say, well, it's very difficult to cross the British Channel and blah, blah, blah. Well, it might have taken them a few decades, but we would have been next, for sure. And we can see this. We can see this because this is why the First World War started. This is one of the major reasons why the First World War started. In that the Kaiser was building up his navy in direct competition with us. And this is one of the reasons why this whole thing kicked off. And it's interesting when you start raising these points, because then all of a sudden you're on this backwards sliding scale, and then you really kind of like pull the mask off these neo-Nazis, and you really start to see actually how pro-German they really are. Because if you do get into a debate with them, automatically they start bringing up the Treaty of Versailles, and then they start saying, oh, well, you started the First World War and Germany was innocent. And it's like, well, hang on, like, whose side are you on? Not only are you defending Moustache Man, right? Because they defend Moustache Man because he fought against the you-know-whos and because he was a racist. Right, that's how they defend him on the surface. But once you start to debate with these people, you pull the mask off, and it's like, well, not only are you defending Germany because of the Moustache Man, you're defending Germany in everything. You're defending Germany in the First World War as well. And that's what they'll do. They'll say, oh, it's, England started the First World War, la-di-la-di-la. They'll start bringing out quotations. We've got various Churchill quotations where apparently says, things like Germany is evil and we have to kill all the Germans. These quotations are fake. Go and look it up. Go and do your research. But yes, fascists and neo-Nazis do lie, and they do invent things, and they do make up false quotations, and then they put them on the internet. And that's what's going on. So there's a lot of quotes of that nature circulating. Do not believe them. But the fact of the matter is, Germany started the First World War by being aggressive. That's what happened. We had no need for that war. We already ruled the world. Why on earth would it be in our interests to start a war with Germany? It doesn't really make any sense at all. The simple fact of the matter is that England and Churchill, we always maintained a policy of maintaining a balance of power in Europe. And this is not just a British policy. This goes all the way back to the Treaty of Westphalia, which happened at the end of the wars of the Reformation, so 1650, something like this, right? Because before the Reformation, the Pope would maintain a balance of power in Europe, right? He would put the different powers against each other, whether it's the Byzantine Empire or the Holy Roman Empire or France or Spain or whatever. But he would kind of like keep them matched, you see. Then, of course, the wars of the Reformation happened. The Pope no longer had the power that he had. And so we have we have the beginning of international law, essentially. And we had the Treaty of Westphalia, and we European people, we decided to agree, okay, we don't want any single European power to dominate everything. We're just going to keep things in a balance. And then we decided to conquer the world instead. We started projecting our energy outwards. That's a basic simplification of what happened. But Churchill knew this. This is basic history. Churchill knew this, and he could see in the long term the threat if Germany was allowed to conquer Europe. He could see that, well, they'll just be sitting there on our border, and they will be big, and they will be powerful, and they will be a threat. And we don't want that. That is not in our interests. And so he sought to contain Moustache Man, basically. Now, in response to this, the neo-Nazi will just laugh, and he'll say, oh, well, that worked out really well for you, didn't it? Because you look at England now and look at Europe now and look at, you're being conquered by Pakistan and blah, 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 blah. That's how well your defense of empire worked out. Okay. Well, in response to this, there are a number of answers to this, okay? One answer would be to point out that Moustache Man would have genocided all the Slavic races. And I'm saying this because essentially the neo-Nazis are saying they're putting forward Moustache Man as the defender of the white race, as a sum total. And their argument is better to be conquered by Germany and still be white. So you could point out that, well, okay, England might still be white, but the Slavic races would have got genocided, because that's what Moustache Man wanted. He wanted living room. He wanted to turn them all into slaves, and he wanted Germans to be breeding in Russia, right? And it's kind of a strong argument, but because it's true. But the thing is that Nazis don't actually care at all about Slavic people, which is kind of funny, because obviously you have so many Ukrainian Nazis. And you've even got neo-Nazis in Russia, which is just like the most hilarious thing ever. But like I said before, it's a controlled ops. It's a psyop. So, there you go. But ultimately, that's quite a weak argument, because how does that affect England, right? So following on from that, you could give the argument, well, I wouldn't want to be ruled by a fascist dictatorship. I wouldn't want to live in a socialist country. And again, I'd agree with that. I prefer some form of capitalism. I don't really believe in this big business monopolized stock market capitalism that we have these days, but a kind of small business capitalism, a capitalism that defends family businesses and defends freedom of speech, and we have democracy and so on and so forth. I think it's good. I mean, for me personally, this is another reason why I'm not into the whole Nazi thing. If you look at history, the British Empire was the greatest expression of European power in the whole world. We conquered the whole world. There was the late Victorian period was called the Belle Epoque, the beautiful age, by the French. And in that period, white European nations dominated the entire world. We were 25% of the world's population. We had total military and economic dominance over everything. And we had a good culture. We had ballroom dancing. People dressed nicely. We didn't have any of this weird transgenderism or any other nonsense. We had a high, sophisticated, educated culture. And we had this at the same time that we had democracy. Women couldn't vote, which was good, but it worked. So all this fascist nonsense about, oh, democracy is evil and we need socialism and so on and so forth, it's a load of nonsense. If we want to rebuild Western civilization, we should take a look back, and we should look at, well, when was Western civilization great? Oh, let me think. Late Victorian period, the beautiful age. We can't copy it completely, because obviously time has changed. And the technology has changed. So new technology means you need new laws. But nonetheless, we could take it as a reference point and say, well, that worked. Let's try and do that again. Okay? The neo-Nazis, of course, just totally reject all this. They're socialists. They want some kind of blank slate, year zero revolution. So you could say all this to the Nazis. You could say, well, I don't want to get conquered by Germany because I don't want to live in a socialist dictatorship. But the Nazis will hold the upper hand in that argument, because they'll say, well, at least you'd still be white, And they're right, because the racial answer to this question is that's the trump card, ultimately. I mean, if you've got this far in this video presentation and you don't understand race realism, then I don't know what to say to you. But essentially, the fact of the matter is that white DNA is recessive, right? White genes are recessive. If a brown-skinned man has sex with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed lady, then the child will have brown hair and brown eyes, because blue eyes is recessive. The DNA that creates blue eyes will be covered by the brown DNA. And so if you allow brown people to live in your country, then after a few hundred years of interbreeding, your country will be brown. And that's it. And you will not be English anymore. You will be something else. That's really at the heart of race realism. This is something, by the way, again, in the Victorian era, right? The neo-Nazis, they don't celebrate this because they're too busy idolizing Germany. But all of these thoughts were pioneered by the Victorians. Spencer and others. Madison Grant, the American Madison Grant, was the pinnacle of all of this. and his disciple Lothrop Stoddard, which by the way is where the term white supremacist comes from. What was Lothrop Stoddard defending when he talked about white supremacy? He was saying political supremacy of the world. If you look at his book, the first thing he talks about is the war between the Japanese and the Russians, and how the Russians lost, and how this is like a warning shot across the world, because all of a sudden the powerful white man could be defeated, right? It's like the first time it had happened. So he was talking about political domination of the world more than anything. But nonetheless, Madison Grant, the pinnacle of Anglo white nationalist scientific racialist thought, he was defeated by who? A you-know-who called Franz Boas, right? The key, the most important intellectual debate in the 20th century, really. Madison Grant took a very calm and straightforward and scientific approach to racial anthropology, and Franz Boas, the you-know-who, came along and said there's no such thing as race. There's no difference between a white man and a black man. It's all just culture. And of course, because he was funded and because they behave in a very cult-like manner, he was able to get into academia. He took academia. And once you've taken the universities, obviously new generation of students come in, they get brainwashed, they become the next middle class, and then boom, 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 in a 20-year cycle, over the course of a century, your civilization's destroyed, right? So anyway, that's race realism for you. But the point being that the race card trumps everything. The neo-Nazis are correct about this. Although you could argue that neo-Nazis, in a way, they're actually more interested in ideology than they are in race. But anyway, whatever the case, the race card trumps everything. The Eastern Europe is a good example of this. Those Eastern European countries, totally crushed by communism, an incredible amount of suffering and death and pain, and yet they're bouncing back. They're still white, and so their future is bright, right? So so politically speaking, they were totally screwed over, but they'll bounce back. But once your blood has been diluted by multiculturalism or multiracialism, to be more exact, there will be no bouncing back. You don't bounce back from that. You can't bounce back, because once it's mixed, and it's gone, and it's done, and it's game over. So in response, this is what the neo-Nazi will argue. He would say, better to be conquered by Germany, because at least you'd still be white, right? And so arguing against fascism and socialism, it's not that it's a totally useless argument. It is an argument that has to be made, because obviously if we want to rally the British people, the British public are never going to rally behind fascism, because here in this country we believe in liberty, and we have the memory of the Victorian Empire, and we have the memory of our long, long struggle for liberty. And I personally believe in liberty. I believe in democracy. I'm not against it at all. And I think constitutional monarchy is the greatest form of government in the world. We have the stability of the monarch. Yeah, I mean, the problem with all this is it's very hard to defend the current monarch because he's so weak and useless. But nonetheless, the monarch is a member of a family that's ruled over us for 1,000 years. Well, different families, but you know what I mean. But he represents a continuous English tradition, and he upholds that tradition, even though he is a bit left-wing. The real solution to the problem of monarchy is to hope that little Prince George is better than his father and his grandfather. That's the real solution. But nonetheless, like I said before, you have to be in tune. If you want the British public to rally behind you, you have to be in tune with them, which means you have to understand the gammon. They love the monarchy. They love democracy. They love the British Empire. Simple as, right? That's it. If you're preaching all this fascist nonsense to them, they're not going to like it, and they're going to reject it again and again. So you have to understand this, and I think also on a deeper level. This is one thing about fascism. You have to understand liberty is good. on a fundamental level, it should be understood. And it's very upsetting to me that I see so many people on the internet just saying, oh, democracy is bad. Oh, it's the source of all our problems. Well, it worked in the Victorian age. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Even the two-party system worked in the Victorian age because both parties were essentially the same. People say, oh, that's a problem. Well, it's not if both parties are good. You know what I mean? But you have to understand something about European history as a whole. This is a broad subject matter, so I'm not going to go into it in depth. But when it comes to European history as a whole, we were all enslaved by Christianity. We were all enslaved by Constantine the Great, who pushed the whole of Europe down into serfdom. He converted to Christianity. He destroyed our history by replacing it with the history of the Old Testament. He destroyed freedom of speech by restricting the pagan freedom to worship. And he pushed us into slavery by making 90% of European people as a whole serfs and tying them to the land. And European history as a whole can be seen as the struggle to regain our liberty from this Christian tyranny. And I'm not saying that because I'm anti-Christian. I'm not. And obviously the story is a little bit more complicated than that. But nonetheless, this is the story of the European people. And this is the story on our island. This is the freedom we've struggled for. And then you get these neo-Nazis come along saying, oh no, democracy's bad. Well, the British public are never going to rally behind that in a million years. So you can say this argument. You can say this, and it's a good argument to have, but nonetheless, I will admit, the neo-Nazi has the upper hand in this case, because the neo-Nazi will just say, well, at least you still be white, and he's right. He's right. So what is the real answer to this question? I mean, before we get into the real argument, you could make the case that, well, yeah, we'd still be white, but we wouldn't be English. We'd be German or some kind of mix. And this is kind of true, because in my opinion, when it comes to the English race, we are, in actual fact, we're really a mix of German and Celt. In my opinion, when it comes to the racial makeup of our nation, you have the original British, who are now called the Welsh, and then you have the Irish, right? The Scottish people are also Irish; they're Gaelic people, and then we have the English, and we came over with Hengist and Horsa, so the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Angles. We originally come from Denmark, and we came over here and we conquered. But obviously, we've been interbreeding with Welsh people and Irish people for a long, long time. So I think it's fair to say that we are particularly a blend of German and Celt, and that should be understood and that should be celebrated. Hopefully at some period in time in the future we can find some kind of peace between this, a peaceful conclusion to this ongoing 1,500 year long race war between the English and the Irish. But that's a subject for another day. So you could argue this. Oh, well, we'd be German. I mean, there are some people who think the Germans are very, they're not as pure-blooded as they like to imagine that they are. Lothrop Stoddard, interesting enough, had this opinion, which is probably why the neo-Nazis don't celebrate him so much. And again, when it comes to Moustache Man, white nationalists like to pretend he's the savior of the white race. He's not really. He's the savior of the German race. That's what he really believed in. He didn't have a high opinion of Slavic people. He didn't have a high opinion of Mediterranean people, and he didn't care for the Irish, right? So, but still, I would say that in this argument, the neo-Nazis still kind of have the upper hand, because at least we'd still be white, right? Better to be half German than to be half Pakistani, for sure. So what's the real answer to this question? When, to repeat, let's just catch up with ourselves. I'm arguing that we acted in our own interests to declare war on Germany in the Second World War. I'm not talking about whether or not who started it. I'm just saying it was in our interest to declare war because we were trying to maintain a balance of power in Europe, and this is in our interest because if Germany had conquered Europe, then it would have ended up conquering us. The response to this from the neo-Nazis is to say, well, better for that to happen than to be speaking Pakistani. And they will also say, well, it didn't work out in your favor, did it? So you should have stayed out. Well, this is where we really get down to the nitty-gritty. So what's the real answer? The real answer is that it was a Pyrrhic victory. And there is no way for Churchill, and there was no way for England to have predicted that things would have turned out as badly as they did. And actually, if you do look back at the history, there are many reasons why it made perfect, logical sense for us to get involved in this war. So I want to make it clear here that I'm not saying that we started the war before anybody kind of like misquotes me. I'm not saying that at all. The question of who started the war, I'll talk about later. I mean, I think that Moustache Man started it by invading Austria and by breaking the Treaty of Versailles and starting the dominoes falling, essentially, because that's what happened. He invaded Austria, broke the Treaty of Versailles. Next thing, he invaded Sudetenland, and Neville Chamberlain went there, offered him peace. He said, yeah, we had peace in our time. And then Moustache Man laughed at him, and then he invaded Prague. And then we said, look, mate, stop invading countries or it's going to be war. And then he invaded Poland, and then the war kicked off. And then even then it was just a phony war, but then he invaded Norway and then France and boom, 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 boom. Those were the dominoes. That's how they fell. And I think it's quite obvious to everybody that it was Moustache Man that started that process. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. I'm just making it clear, crystal clear to you. I'm still arguing from the point of was it in our interests or not to be involved in this war. So first of all, let me make it really clear that if people had listened to Churchill earlier on, then perhaps the entire thing could have been averted, because Churchill was advocating to raise troops and do this, that, and the other, right? People ignored him. But if we had listened earlier on, if we'd have got ourselves prepared earlier on, then maybe none of this would have happened. So that's the first point I'd like to make. But let's look specifically at Poland, because this is where the real war, with England really kicked off, right? As I say, Moustache Man started it by invading Austria, but we got involved with Poland. And a lot of people say it was a mistake to defend Poland and so on and so forth. I'm going to make the argument that it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Why? For a few reasons. Number one, in fact, I'm going to give you 7 reasons, right? Reason number 1, we had naval superiority. So the idea of defending Poland was that, well, if Germany did invade Poland, then those two could fight it out and we would just dominate the seas. And we would blockade Germany, as we did in the First World War, and prevent them from getting supplies. And then by doing that, we could help Poland win. So it wasn't a completely crazy idea. Secondly, we had no way of knowing that Germany would form an alliance with the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. How do we know that this was going to happen? How do we know? Nobody could have guessed this. Nobody could have guessed that the Soviet Union and Germany would have teamed up to utterly devour and crush Poland. I mean, it is interesting if you ever debate these subjects online with people, they'll say, oh, well, you defending Poland, that didn't really work out, did it? And it's like, well, at least we tried, right? The Germans just tore them to pieces. How can you make out that the Germans are somehow the good guys here? I mean, it is really funny, actually, when you debate Nazis, because they always say, oh, look, evil Churchill sided with evil Stalin, and Stalin was a communist, and you made a partnership with him, therefore you're bad. And it's like, well, so did Moustache Man when it suited you. You absolute hypocrites. But anyway, moving on. Point number 3, there was no way for us to know that France would just collapse so easily. There was no way for us to know that the Maginot Line would collapse, right? France had built a line of fortifications known as the Maginot Line. I probably mispronounced that. Of course, Germany, they snuck through a gap in it, and they encircled the French army, and they crushed them, right? And then, of course, Dunkirk happened, and so on and so forth. I actually am of the opinion we should never have had troops on the continent. That was a military blunder on our behalf. But yeah, there you go. That's what happened. We're not talking about military blunders here. I mean, I was going to talk about it later, but one of the criticisms that people throw at Churchill was that he made many, many mistakes. Okay? Blundered Norway. He blundered the Gallipoli invasion in the First World War. He made a whole series of mistakes. And it's like, okay, nobody ever said that Churchill was a military genius. And anybody who knows anything about the Second World War knows that this guy, this is not what he's famous for. He's famous for having grit. He's famous for standing firm and refusing to surrender. That's what Churchill's famous for. And he's also famous for being right that, Germany was aggressive and things are going to just go out of control. So, was he a drunken alcoholic? Probably, right? Was he a terrible military strategist? Probably, right? But that's not what we're debating here. Well, the question is, was it in our interests to get involved in this war? And the answer is, yeah, it was the right decision to make. We could have blockaded Poland. We didn't know that Germany would team up with the Soviet Union. We didn't know the French would collapse, right? We didn't know that Germany would be able to take Norway so easily. That's another point. So that's the fourth point. The fifth point is that we knew we had America on our side. I mean, they came to our aid in the First World War, so why wouldn't they do it again? And obviously, I do realize that we ended up bankrupting ourselves with this. And yeah, the Americans are not our friends. And yes, Churchill was stupid to think that they are. And yes, even English people these days are stupid to think that the Americans are our friends. I like Americans, by the way. I'm not anti-American. I regard America as our colony. And I regard them as being fundamentally English. And I regard them as being a people that are like a ship without a rudder. Because they have separated themselves from their past with their 1776 revolution, which was a Masonic revolution paid for by the French. But although they know they have a history rooted in this country, they see their history as starting in 1776. And they see their history as being fundamentally anti-British. And so they're disconnected from their past. And so they are susceptible to individualism. And so they are susceptible to this meme of being a nation of immigrants. Because if they themselves are saying they're not English, then they are just a nation of immigrants. They are. That's why that idea has taken over. And that because that idea has taken over in America, it's spread all across the world. So I'm not anti-American, but they are anti-English. And it is a problem that needs to be solved, which is why I say this conversation that I'm having here on this video and on my YouTube channel is the most important conversation that needs to be had, because English men need to stand up. We need to stand up to the neo-Nazis, and we need to stand up to the Americans, and we need to say, no, we are right, we are the best, and we need to stop apologizing to all these people. And once we do this, then we will be able to say to the Americans, look, you guys are English, and then the Americans, and then we can cure this problem that they have, and then a racial identity can awaken within America, because currently Americans just call themselves white, and it's like, well, it's not bad. By the way, I'm not against calling myself white. I am white. If I went to Africa, I would be white. I do understand this. There are some people that say, oh, it's, I'm not a white nationalist, I'm an English nationalist, and it's like, okay, but yeah, I get it. But at the end of the day, like, you're gonna get killed for your skin color. You know what I mean? So we kind of are all in this together. So I'm not against white identity per se, but for people to really push back against globalism and against wokeism and against all the foreigners, they need to reach back into their history, all the way back to mythology, all the way back to Hengist and Horsa, and all the way back to Odin and Germanic paganism and all of it. If you're cut off from your history and you're cut off from your mythology, you're already half dead. And that's the problem with America. And it needs to be cured. And the only people that can cure it is the English, is us. But for the last flipping 150 years, or more than that, nearly 250 years, sorry, every English conservative thinker has celebrated the American Revolution. And it's got to end. I mean, this goes all the way back to Edmund Burke in his Reflections on the Revolution in France, right? Edmund Burke is the father of the conservative movement, but he was Irish, he was Catholic, and he was a liberal, or he was a Whig, sorry. So he was a progressive, he was a reformer. He wanted change. He just wanted it to be done slowly, which is why the Tory party always cheats its people. Conservatism is a joke. It conserves nothing. But nonetheless, the point I'm making is British academics and thinkers and philosophers for the last 250 years have all basically celebrated the American Revolution. And it's kind of got to end because they betrayed their king and they betrayed their people. And unless you take a firm stance on that, then they're never going to respect us. So, I mean, I sympathize with it because, like I said before, the struggle of the European people has been the struggle out of serfdom. And a big part of that was America and our colonies. John Locke himself was inspired by America. So the freedom of America did turn into freedom in Europe. But as English men, we have to be loyal to our men. And the fact of the matter is that American revolutionaries killed English men who fought on the side of England. So if we celebrate the Revolutionary War, we are spitting in the faces of our ancestors. We're spitting in the faces of brave men who fought on our side. And this even before, this is the fundamental cucking, by the way, of the English race. This is really where we lost. If you really, really want to know, this is psychologically where we were broken. That's the point. The American Revolutionary War. Before all the neo-Nazism. Now, it took a long time for that issue, that philosophical issue, to spread its rot and to poison us. But that's where it started, because we turned against our own men, our own soldiers that fought on our side, and we were cowards. We didn't want to call the Americans traitors, but they are traitors. It's a nation of traitors. Washington was a traitor. And that's it. And unless we've got unless we have the dignity to say that, then we're always going to be lost. And I say that as someone that sympathizes with Washington. I do to a certain extent. But let's face it, that was a Masonic revolution paid for by the French. And they turned against their rightful king, and they turned against good, brave English men. So we cannot celebrate it. And King George III was a good king. He was a good king. They call him the Mad King. Actually, King George III kicked all the Whigs out of Parliament. If he hadn't have done that, we might have ended up having a revolution like the French did. And we wouldn't have any king now. God knows what kind of chaos we'd be living in. So you got to get your head straight. Before we even talk about the Second World War, you got to get your head straight on the American Revolutionary War. Right? Slight tangent there. But anyway, the subject of America appeared. But it's got to be understood. Let me put it another way. Alex Jones, the great conspiracy theorist, right? What's his bread and butter? Well, he spends a lot of time slagging off the Pope, which, okay, fair enough. But a lot of time, he doesn't do it so much anymore, but he used to hurl abuse at the Queen of England. Oh, the British monarchy and all our presidents are British monarchy and blah, blah, blah. And then he'd be slagging off the Freemasons. And it's like, well, hang on, mate. America is literally a Masonic country. 13 colonies. Washington looks like a giant, like if you look at the map, it's a pentagon, right? It's an utterly Masonic country. America was the first country in the world to have a 5-pointed star on its flag. What is a 5-pointed star used for? It's used for raising demons, worshipping demons. America is a nation that worships Lucifer, essentially, which is Venus, which is the five-pointed star. So for Alex Jones to hurl abuse at the English and to hurl abuse at Freemasons is a joke. But a lot of Americans feel this way. And a lot of Americans they think that the monarchy is some kind of tyranny. The monarchy is not a tyranny. The monarchy brings stability. And the correct form of government is to have a constitutional monarchy where you have the combination of democracy and king. It brings stability. Again, very hard to defend in the modern age because our monarchy is so weak and pathetic, but nonetheless it worked in the Victorian age. Basically, once you start glorifying the British Empire, everything makes sense. Everything falls. This is why you'll never see neo-Nazis glorifying the British Empire. They're glorifying German idealism and Germany, who never had a good empire. They were always second class. It's amazing that they do this. I mean, we literally conquered the entire world. Why not rally behind that? I mean, I can't remember if I've said this already, but I'll say it again. The English race is the dominant white ethnic race on this world. There's at least 100 million of us. England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. If you consider all the English in America, we could be talking 200 million. So more than the Slavic. And the Anglosphere dominates everything. America is part of the Anglosphere. And in combination with the other elements, economically, militarily, we dominate everything. Still to this day, we dominate everything. And the Anglosphere is the continuation of the British Empire under America's rule instead of under England's rule. So this should be under. So this is our natural rallying point, not Germany. Not Germany. You want to rally. You want to save the white race, save the English race, save the Anglosphere. Job done. We already rule the world. It's utterly retarded for these people to celebrate Germany. But like I say, it's a neo-Nazi psyop, basically. That is what it is. And also these people are national socialists, and socialists are anti-imperialists. Lenin wrote a book about this, didn't he? Blah blah blah. How he hates the empire, right? That's how socialism started. And if you talk to neo-Nazis on the internet, they'll all say the same thing. They'll say, "Oh, the empire, didn't operate in your interests anyway." Right? And by the way, this is another, I didn't mention this, but this is another response that the neo-Nazi might give, right? Let's come back to the argument. I'm arguing why we got involved in the war. Churchill was acting in the interests of the empire. And it was in the interest of the empire to maintain a balance of power in Europe. And this is in our interests as the English race. Now, a response that the neo-Nazi might give is to say that, well, the empire was never in the interests of the English race. It was just for rich people. Well, the answer to that is, first of all, we colonized the world. The French never did it. The Spanish never did it, and the Germans never did it. Where's the German state outside of Germany? It doesn't exist. We created Canada, 20 million whites. Australia, 20 million whites. New Zealand and America. So we spread our seed across the world. So the English race has done more to promote the white race than any other country in Europe. Right? Get that through your thick skulls, you neo-Nazi idiots. It's just preposterous. So let's get that straight. And secondly, the realpolitik is, the pragmatic fact of the matter is that, like Hitchens said, you either rule the world or you either have the empire or you live in somebody else's empire. That's the choice. If we don't rule the world, China will take over, or Russia, or whatever. I don't want to live in a Chinese empire. Can you imagine mass immigration pouring in from China? That's it, finished, gone. Right? If they ever get power, if they ever came to, and they would do it, and they have the numbers, and that would be it. That would just be the end of everything. And there are neo-Nazis that promote this on the internet. They're like, oh, let China's our friend, let them take over. No, China is not our friend. If you think China's our friend, you're totally retarded, okay? So there has to be an empire. I think it's better if we, the English, rule the world. Right? Or I think it's better that the Anglosphere rules the world. And let me make it very clear here. I don't think we can rebuild the British Empire. That has passed, and I'm happy. I'm okay with that. We had our time in the sun. We will be remembered. We will be respected in the same way that the Romans are respected. The Italians, right? They had their empire, and now it's gone. Okay, never mind. But we've made our place in history, and it's okay. I'm looking forward to a long, happy retirement where we just live in the Shire and drink beer, right? And I don't know, play football, play golf, or whatever people do when they're retired. Okay? America can rule the world. That's fine. No problem. It's actually very natural for them to take over. I mean, I can't complain. They did stab us in the back and steal our empire from us. So I'm not happy about it. But at the same time, it was natural. It was going to happen because they're bigger than us. It's just a matter of geography. There's no real shame in it. They've got the natural resources. They've got the numbers. It is what it is. Okay? And it's done. It's a done deal. So I don't think we should reconquer the world. I mean, I do have a far-fetched idea to rebuild the new Roman Empire, in which the idea being that, America accepts our king as a constitutional monarch, and then America already controls Europe, so then we get Europe under our control, and then we kick out all the foreigners, and then we raise an army, and then we invade Saudi Arabia, or the Arabian Peninsula, and we take back North Africa. And you'd have to call it, if you want to unite the white race in that way, you could call it the new Roman Empire, and everybody would follow that flag. So that's a fantasy. Okay, sometimes I like to put fantasies on the internet because it's fun to think about these kind of things. But really speaking, that's a fantasy. Moving forwards, we practically just need to be the English lobby. That's the real aim, the reasonable aim that we should be aiming for. So, kick all the foreigners out, sort our country out, get back on the right track, stop apologizing to neo-Nazis, stop apologizing to Americans, and just say, look, we built the modern world, because we did, right? And now America rules it, that's fine, but we will be a lobby within America. Essentially replace the Israeli lobby with an English lobby. And just say to the Americans, look guys, I know you got daddy issues. Let's get over this. Let's work together, right? Either you work with us or you work with the you-know-whos. And who do you think's got your best interest in heart? Okay, at the end of the day, you're our colony, right? And then we can all have a little bit of a cry and hug each other, kiss and make up. America can rule the world. And we'll just retire. And we'll just be the Shire, and that's fine. That's fine. Happy days, okay? And if we have too much sex and we make too many children, we'll send them to Australia or America or wherever. You know what I mean? Plenty of options. So that's the real practical solution. But anyway, little bit of a tangent there. But the point being that the neo-Nazi is fundamentally anti-empire. And because he's fundamentally anti-empire, he refuses to rally behind the Anglosphere, which is utterly retarded. And I've been moaning about this on the internet for 8 years. But there you go. Returning to what I'm trying to say here. Let's try and come back to the argument. So I'm talking about Poland. Right? We declared war because of Poland, and I'm giving you the reasons why. Firstly, we had the Navy. We could have blockaded them. Secondly, we never could have predicted that Germany would team up with the Soviet Union. Thirdly, we never could have predicted that France would collapse. Fourthly, we didn't know that Moustache Man would have taken Norway. Fifth, we knew we had America on our side, and so we knew we could beat them. Okay? If push comes to shove and things got really bad, we had the plan B, right? And six, another thing that people tend to forget, because again, neo-Nazis are anti-imperialists, so they don't understand these things. But we ruled the world. We were the world's global superpower. And if you're the world's global superpower, then people look to you for leadership. And if Germany starts invading countries in the middle of Europe, especially 20 years after the First World War, people are going to look to England and to the British Empire for leadership. So we had to do something. If we didn't do something, we would have looked weak. In the very same way that if there's any country in the world today thinking about invading another country, the first thing they think is, what will the Americans do? Right? Because America rules the world. In a similar way, back then, the first concern was, well, what will the British do? Right? So we had to do something. Now, and the neo-Nazis will say, well, you gave Poland the ability to start the war. And it's like, well, I don't remember Poland invading Germany. I remember, did the Polish persecute some Germans in Danzig? Well, maybe. Maybe. But maybe those Germans were causing trouble because they were flipping neo-Nazis. Just in the same way Germans were causing trouble in the Sudetenland, Germans were causing trouble in, neo-Nazis were causing trouble in Austria, neo-Nazis were causing trouble in Romania, as far as I remember off the top of my head. So you had a lot of neo-Nazi subversion going on all across Europe. Maybe the Polish were just suppressing that. Okay? So maybe that was going on in Danzig. Maybe there was a bit of a border skirmish, but I don't remember Poland invading Germany. I don't remember that happening, right? Because it didn't happen. So we had, reason number 6, we had to do something. If we didn't, we would look weak. Reason number 7, a little bit abstract, but it was the right thing to do from a moral point of view, because if you read Mein Kampf and if you look at Nazi ideology, they wanted living space and they wanted to wipe out the Slavic people and take their land. In response to that, the neo-Nazi might say, well, that wouldn't have, like, they love to say this. Moustache Man was a hero because he fought against communism. First of all, Germany started that revolution by putting Lenin on a train and sending him there and funding him. This whole idea that Moustache Man was or the Germans are so based and hardcore is total nonsense. First of all, they never built an empire like us. We are 10 times better than they will ever be, right? Let's get that straight. But also they were supremely cucked to the you-know-whos. Now we, here in England, we had a certain you-know-who banking class, which undeniably helped us build the empire and undeniably was part and parcel of the empire. In Germany, they had an entire middle class that was filled with you-know-whos, which is why the Weimar Republic happened. All the teachers, the owners of the business, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of these people in Germany. And what did these people do? Let me think. They helped to sponsor and create the Bolshevik Revolution, which caused mass chaos and death and destruction and horror. That was Germany that did that. Germany. And for some reason, like, neo-Nazis on the internet are like, oh, Germany would have saved the Russian people. Like, come on, guys. Come on. First of all, they created the problem. And second of all, Moustache Man didn't want to save them. He wanted to enslave them and take their land from them. And this is not good from a higher moral perspective. So, yeah, the English race was defending the white race, essentially. There you go, by defending the Polish Slavic race. That's what we were doing, because we're good people. And Germans are bad people that like to start wars in the middle of Europe. That's the real narrative. Then, of course, the neo-Nazi will say, well, look what happened at the end of the war, how you gave Poland away to Stalin. And it's like, well, what could we have done? All right? Sorry, our hands were kind of tied. We were kind of exhausted by having to fight flipping Germans for God knows how many years. I mean, at least we try. I mean, it's amazing that you can blame us for that. When Germany literally invaded Poland. Like, we're not the ones that invaded Poland, guys. Come on. Then at this point, at this crucial point, right? Because I feel like, again, following the argument here, we're not even talking about who started the war. I'm just saying we were acting in our interests. That's the argument I'm presenting to you. It was in our interests to get involved in the war, right? At this point, the neo-Nazi will play his trump card, his MasterCard, and he will say, well, you stupid Englishman, don't you understand that Moustache Man was fighting against the you-know-whos? He was fighting against the you-know-whos. And the you-know-whos are actually the ultimate enemy of the white race. And if you had allowed Moustache Man to win, then the white race would be saved, right? So it's a similar argument to the argument they were, already presented, but slightly different, because now the focus is on the you-know-whos. And so now you've got, these Nazis, again, an anti-imperialist argument saying empires are bad and England is bad because England was in bed with the you-know-whos, like the Rothschilds, the Balfour Declaration, and all the rest of it. Okay. So what's the answer to this? What's the answer to this? Well, some people will just deny the existence of the you-know-whos. Okay? I don't deny that at all. Some people will say, no, that's not true. We weren't in bed with them. But no, I don't deny this at all, personally. We were 100% in bed with the Rothschilds and with bankers, the banking class, right? The money-lending class. And they were part and parcel of our empire. And that's how Churchill saw them, as far as I understand it. And he was right to see them in that way. He saw them as necessary in a way. They were the moneylenders. So let's not deny that Churchill had you-know-who friends. Okay, I've never denied this. And let's not deny that we, the English, were in bed with these people. I've never denied this. But let's also make it really clear that Germany was in bed with these people too. Okay? Like I just said, an entire middle class of these people, and also these people funding and sponsoring and creating the Bolshevik Revolution. And by the way, Moustache Man himself and the Nazi Party itself being paid for by a you-know-who in the early stages. Oh, and Moustache Man having a you-know-who doctor. And Moustache Man having various different you-know-whos in positions of power. And Moustache Man being a Zionist and sending you-know-whos to Israel. Or Palestine, as it was known back then. So how anti-you-know-who was Moustache Man? Well, not really. Maybe he was just a little bit of a socialist. Maybe he supposedly didn't like the Bolsheviks and wanted to ignore the fact that it was the Germans that started all of that. But anyway, don't give me this, the English are so evil because they're in bed with these people. Everybody throughout European history has been in bed with these people. So everybody's coloured by this brush. And as I've said before, the psychological argument, we should not hate ourselves for our mistakes, whether they're mistakes or not, but we should not hate ourselves for our history. That is a huge mistake. If you make that mistake, you will be destroyed. Again, let's look at Stalin. Let's look at the way that Putin deals with Stalin. Putin is not when they teach Stalin in the schools, they teach him side by side with Solzhenitsyn. But they're not falling into the trap of shame. Oh, I'm so ashamed because of the Soviet Union. No, because it's detrimental to Russian mental health, basically. It's just like, okay, that happened, let's move on. In a similar way, like, our country, like, we have declared ourselves to be Jerusalem at one point, which is hilarious, right? When the monarch gets crowned, we sing Zadok the priest, right? I mean, our nation is entwined with the you-know-whos. But at the same time, we also fought against these people because Longshanks kicked them out. And we also had a Reformation. I mean, my argument is that Catholicism is essentially a you-know-who spy network. I'm not against Christianity because Christianity is part of European history. And again, I'm slightly wary of pagans who like to hurl abuse at Christians, because if you're hurling abuse at Christians, then you're hurling abuse at European history, and you're also hurling abuse at your father, grandfather, great-grandfather, etc., etc. And so you end up hating yourself, and you end up failing to celebrate a huge chunk of European history. So hating Christianity is a huge mistake. But nonetheless, Christianity was a religion that manifested from the you-know-whos, right? Like I said, Constantine enslaved us, washed away our history and replaced it with the Old Testament. So anyway, the point I'm making, the whole of Europe's been in bed with these people. Like, so don't give me this. Like, don't give me this. The question we're asking is, was it in our interests to defend Poland and get involved in that war? The neo-Nazis will say that Moustache Man was fighting against the you-know-whos and you were in bed with them. And it's like, well, it was a beneficial relationship for us. We had conquered the world. This is not like late-stage American empire, by the way, which is filled with Mexicans and transgenders and God knows what else. We had a good empire. People dressed nicely. People spoke nicely. Nice architecture. Family-friendly. It's not like the British Empire was like the Weimar Republic or something. We were doing really, really well. So why would we turn against the you-know-whos? It was a beneficial relationship for us. Now, you could say in the long term, like, we should have understood the history of these people and what they wanted and so on and so forth. Well, you know, hindsight's 2020, right? Yeah, right? Like, we ruled the world. You could say we suffered from hubris. Well, I would agree. Perhaps we should have dealt with this problem. I mean, there were a lot of people in that age that did talk about this problem quite openly. So, you know, the ins and the outs. But it was a beneficial relationship for us. And in response to that, the neo-Nazi will say, well, it didn't turn out so good in the end, did it? And I would say, yeah. And that is the narrative that we should take in regard to the Second World War and Winston Churchill and the you-know-whos. The narrative, and nobody's been able to develop this, by the way, because anybody that gets involved with this subject matter and starts asking these questions just gets their mind bewildered by neo-Nazism and all kinds of garbage. But I'm going to tell you the narrative straight right now, and the narrative is that we were stabbed in the back, okay? And we all know this is Moustache Man's narrative in relation to the First World War, right? Moustache Man thinks that they were just about to win, and then the you-know-whos had a revolution, and they stabbed Germany in the back, and that's why he had a chip on his shoulder, and he wanted to start another war and burn the whole world down. Okay, well, our narrative in relation to the Second World War, and in relation to Churchill, and in relation to the you-know-whos, should be that we were stabbed in the back by these people. And what I mean by that is that we tried to help them. We did the Balfour Declaration, we gave them Palestine, and we tried to save them from the National Socialists. And what's the result? They teamed up with America, they stole our empire from us, and nowadays they're encouraging multiculturalism, they bombed the King David Hotel, and they're calling us racist now, and they hate white people, and apparently we're guilty of the shower rooms as well, even though we fought against the people that did the shower rooms. That's a German war crime. We didn't do that, but they're trying to guilt trip us for that as well. So the narrative in relation to these people is that they stabbed us in the back. We were in a partnership with them, and it cannot be denied. Otherwise, you just end up denying the whole question itself, and then the neo-Nazi wins. Because the way the neo-Nazi has the upper hand in this debate on the internet is that they've got race realism on their side, and they've got the you-know-who question on their side. And most civic nationalists, when they get involved in this debate, they won't talk about these two subject matters. And so the neo-Nazi has this in his pocket, and he ends up winning the debate, you see. So you have to address both of these subject matters. So you can't deny that we were in bed with these people. But the basic answer is everyone was in bed with these people, including Germany. Okay? That's the first answer. And the second answer was it was a beneficial relationship for us. And perhaps, yeah, we should have known better, but okay, mistakes were made. But the third answer is, what is our relationship with them now? They stabbed us in the back. They are ungrateful, essentially, is the message that we should give to all of these people. Basically, we should say to them, we created Israel for you, and now look how you treat us. Well, treat us is that's a bit victim, isn't it? But, look how you talk to us now. Look how you talk down to us after everything that we did for you. You have ruthlessly betrayed us. We were your friends. We helped you. We allowed you into British society. We made you part of our empire. And look how you've treated us. Look what you've done to us now. And look how you spit on us now. And look down on us. And encourage multiculturalism. And tell us that we're racist and so on and so forth. That is the narrative. That's the narrative. We were friends. You turned against us. That's the narrative, in my opinion, anyway. I mean, it can be discussed. But like I say, any discussion of the subject matter always just gets twisted out of... Because nobody can talk about it, because anybody that does talk about it gets, turned into a golem by neo-Nazis on the internet, by secret neo-Nazis. And the civ-nats don't talk about it. So I'm the only guy that's talking about it. You know what I mean? Just me. So there you go. Right, so let's move forward. So just to recap, I'm arguing that it was in our interests to get involved in the war. I haven't asked the question yet of who started it. I'm just saying it was in our interests. And the Nazis, in response to this, they say, well, you never could have won it. I say that we could have. The Nazis say you shouldn't have got involved. I say we had to defend the empire and we had to maintain a balance of power in Europe. The Nazis say that all empires are bad. I say that empires are just necessary. And better that we rule the world than anybody else. The Nazis say, in response to all this, that Moustache Man was fighting the real enemy, the you-know-whos, and we were in bed with the you-know-whos. I say that everybody was in bed with them. Yes, they were part of the empire, but no, Churchill didn't want to destroy the empire or anything crazy like this. He actually just saw them as part and parcel of the empire, and he worked with them, essentially. And that the real narrative in respect to all this is for us to say that, well, we were betrayed by them. We were stabbed in the back by them. We created Israel for them and they stabbed us in the back. So in response to all of this, the Nazi may double down again and he may say, no, Churchill was evil and he was a Satanist and he hated Germans and he wanted to kill German babies and he was completely owned by the you-know-whos. And then they'll start talking about David Irving and they'll say something about the Forum, which is this idea that Irving came up with, that there was a secret group called the Forum and they planned the war and it was all blah, 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 right? Okay, well, what do I say in reaction to this? Well, first of all, it doesn't really matter because we're still left with the question of the national myth, and we're still left with the question, we're still left with the fact that history is subjective and it should be triumphalist, and we should be very wary of turning our national heroes into demons because of the effect that it will have on us. But putting that aside, it doubly doesn't matter because it's impossible to prove. And you could say, well, I've got the secret document that proves this, that, and the other. And I could say in response to that, well, I've got secret documents that don't prove it, right? Or I could say, well, okay, what about Moustache Man? He was also working for the you-know-whos. He was funded by you-know-who bankers. And the whole of Germany was in bed with the you-know-whos. I mean, they did, like I said before, they helped to create the Bolshevik Revolution. And what happened? What was the effect that Moustache Man had on Europe? Well, he destroyed the British and the French Empire. So he destroyed Europe's control of the world, gave half of Europe to the Soviet Union, which was run by the Bolsheviks, and put America in charge, right? and also created a myth of the shower rooms, which has been very, very helpful for the you-know-whos. So you could easily argue that Moustache Man was in bed with them. So in general, when it comes to conspiracies, I would say that it's not that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I am a conspiracy theorist, but I tend to look at, or to believe in, or to consider conspiracies that are easily provable. And what I mean by that is that when it comes to the subject matter of the you-know-whos, this is just a straightforward fact. This is not really much of a conspiracy. It's more like there is an ethnic group and they have a lobby, and Israel is America's greatest ally, and the ADL will stop you from criticizing Israel. And, you know, you have various you-know-whos that run Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Google and etc., etc. So they have immense power in that regard. They have immense power in the banking industry. They have immense power in Hollywood. And you look through the history of various different things that happen in the world, and you look down, you scroll down, you see early life, and it's like, these people are behaving in their own interests, their own ethnic interests. They encourage multiculturalism and liberalism because it's in their ethnic interest. So it's not really, it is a conspiracy because you're not allowed to talk about it, but it's quite a blatantly obvious one. It's just hard for people to accept because it's so dark. And it's also racial. And everybody's been programmed to believe that any kind of racial conception is just totally evil. But then the question comes, why do they believe that? Well, they believe that because of Franz Boas, who was a you-know-who created the idea that race is just a social construct. So when it comes to this ultimate taboo, this ultimate conspiracy, it's like, yeah, it's a conspiracy, but it's not it's not like a conspiracy that's like, oh, I've got this secret document that proves this, that, and the other, right? It's not like David Irving saying Churchill was a member of the Forum and they had a secret meeting, and in this secret meeting they agreed this, that, and the other. Because when it comes to that kind of conspiracy, that stuff is unprovable. I'm not saying it doesn't go on, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be discussed. You can, but you're digging into a murky world of misinformation. So, I mean, let me further clarify that. I do 100% believe, like, I am aware that the World Economic Forum exists, and the Bilderberg Group, and the Club of Rome, and Freemasons, and the Illuminati. I've seen all the hand symbols and signals, and obviously this stuff is going on. Obviously Pizzagate is going on. Obviously some form of child sacrifice and etc., etc. And weird, bad stuff is going on. But who's involved in it? It's hard to say. Who's good and who's bad? Well, sometimes when it comes to really bad people, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, it's pretty flippin' obvious. But when it comes to people that are kind of 50-50, it's very hard to tell. Donald Trump being one of them. Is he a good guy who genuinely wants to fight the system? Or did he just come to power in order to galvanize the left, right? This is a possibility. Maybe that's why he ran in the first place in 2016, because things were quite calm and peaceful, and then he ran, and then the left had something to fight against, and now they're winning everything. I mean, that's a possibility. That's a genuine possibility. But can you prove it? No, not really. Not really. You can't really prove it 100%. And so it's better just to say he's a good guy. And the same goes for, I don't know, Jordan Peterson, Alex Jones, Elon Musk, Nigel Farage, like all of these political leaders and figures who are sort of right-wing, sort of reactionary, sort of dissident, but kind of not really, and you're not really sure, are they a gatekeeper? Is Alex Jones a gatekeeper? Is David Icke a gatekeeper? You're never going to know. You can't show me the secret document that proves this stuff. Okay, there are some certain people when it comes out and it turns out that they are a you-know-who and they've been lying about it, well, then you can be much more certain. But for the most part, you're just going to drive yourself crazy thinking about it. And so it's much better just to say, well, the cup's half full, right? And in regard to e-celebs in particular, I just like to say, well, what would the guy down the pub say, right? When it comes to, like, I don't know, Tommy Robinson. Now, Tommy Robinson loves Israel, right? And it's quite possible that he's a you-know-who, or he's working for Mossad or whatever. But if you go down the pub and you're talking to someone and he says he likes Tommy Robinson, what does it mean? It means he's a good guy. So it's more about what he symbolizes than anything else. And the same goes for Trump, and the same goes for Churchill, the same goes for Moustache Man, the same goes for all leaders who fought. It's just, in my opinion, a waste of time to blab on about them being part of some secret group, because you can't prove it, and even if you could prove it, somebody else could come along and disprove it with their own secret document. So why bother? And again, I'm not denying that there's a conspiracy. I am like the most hardcore of all conspiracy theorists. I'm willing to accept it all. Flat Earth, shape-shifting lizards, aliens, like whatever. It's a total mess. But at the end of the day, you're still left stuck in this world. And what are you going to do? Go and live in the forest and stick your head in the sand? That's not going to do anything. So when it comes to conspiracy theories, you have to accept that, okay, definitely there's a whole bunch of lies and something really, really, really crazy is going on. But at the end of the day, you're still living in this world, and it all comes back at the end of the day to government policy, essentially. And what I mean by that is, take a look at David Icke and his book, Everything You Need to Know. I read his book. I thought, great, I'm going to finally figure out what David Icke is all about. But he doesn't give you any political manifesto for change. He doesn't explain to you what type of government he would want to live under. It's just a complaint. That's all he's doing. He's just pointing and saying, look, secret societies and groups and things, and they're planning and they're running things. And it's like, okay, well, what's next, David? How do you think we should run the country? What's your tax plan, right? Should we shut down the NHS or not? Should we do this? Should we do that? Are you a Republican? Are you this? Are you that? And he doesn't answer. He has no political theory. It's slightly better with Alex Jones, who at least is a Republican. You can understand where he's coming from. But if you go really deep into the conspiracy thing, you just end up with people who are just basically anarchists. They won't admit that they're anarchists, but they just hate the government in general. And they won't tell you how you should politically interact with the government, and they'll just tell you don't vote. And so they encourage you in the end to give away what little power you have. And then they'll be, look at me, I'm so clever, I don't vote. And it's like, well, you've just fallen for another psyop, the conspiracy theory psyop. Oh, I'm so clever, I know about flat Earth and shape-shifting lizards and the WEF. Oh, you're voting. Oh, you're so stupid. Well, actually, votes do have power. That's why the government spends so much money trying to brainwash people to get them to vote the right way. So yeah, you do have a little bit of power, and you should use it. I mean, classic example is, right now it's election year. People should be voting for reform because Richard Tice is taking an anti-immigration stance. Net zero immigration. This is what we want. This is more radical than anything Donald Trump said. And yet, does the internet rally behind him? No. Why? Because people think they're so flipping clever and they're so cool. And it's like, oh, you're not voting for him. Oh, you don't believe in democracy, do you? We need to destroy everything. I don't even know what these people are thinking. Half of them are anarchists. They just want to destroy all government. The other half are fascists, and they want to also get rid of democracy, right? And have a more totalitarian government. Doesn't make any sense. And you end up with a situation where it's just like crabs in a barrel. And I mean, let's explain this further, right? If you have any kind of philosophical debate with anybody, you're always left with the question of who has the burden of proof, right? If I tell you God exists, I have the burden of proving to you that God exists. And usually the person with the burden of proof loses the argument, because the skeptic can always say, oh, I don't accept your proof. I don't accept your argument. And the skeptic is safe because he's not presenting any argument. He's not saying, oh, this is how it is or that's how it is. He just sits in the background criticizing everything. And conspiracy theorists are like this. Oh, it's all a conspiracy, it's all rubbish. And you say to them, well, what's your plan then? They say, oh, I don't have a plan, it's all rubbish. And you say, well, that's not a plan, is it? You know, and someone like me says, vote reform. And people say, oh, you're so stupid. And it's like, well, what's your plan? I don't have a plan. Well, you're dumb then, aren't you? So effectively, the internet's just like crabs in a barrel. You propose something that's going to fix the country, and a mob will just come along and drag you down. Because it's easier to have no opinions. It's easier to not propose anything that would solve the problem. And if you do propose something, then everyone's going to argue with you and disagree with you. So there's a certain negativity and destructiveness to Twitter, essentially. And people are too cool to vote for anything that would solve anything. But the fact of the matter is that as a country, we did do Brexit. We had a referendum and we voted to leave the European Union and we left it. This is a great victory that we should be celebrating. But because everybody's depressed and everybody's too cool, they won't celebrate it. Right? We also got put into a lockdown. People demonstrated and forced the government to take us out of the lockdown. People should be celebrating this. This is a great victory for us. 2 great victories in a row. Nobody's celebrating it. Why? It's easier to be depressed. It's easier to be a doomer. It's easier to say that, oh, everything's rubbish. And so when you have a real opportunity for change, because we do have an opportunity for change here, we have a political party led by a guy who wants net zero immigration. We could vote for him. We could get 10 million people to vote for this. We had 10 million people voting for Brexit. They could vote for him. And the entire internet should be rallying behind this guy and saying, okay, we don't agree with all of his policies, but nonetheless, let's vote for this guy. Okay? Because whatever. You know, fuck the Tory party, basically. Fuck the system. Let's just vote for this guy. That's what people should be saying. But they're not. Why? Negativity. The doomer attitude. It's poison. It's total poison. So, and like I said, many reasons for that. Partly the burden of proof. Partly it's just easier. But partly also just a belief in it. Oh, it's a conspiracy. Everything's dark. And it's like, okay, everything's dark. I agree. I totally accept what you're saying. The world is flat. It's run by aliens. Fine. What now, David Icke? What do we do now? How do we solve our situation? And they'll say, well, people need to wake up. There needs to be an awakening. And it's like, well, actually, a lot of people are aware of conspiracy theories. You go out and talk to ordinary people, like half of them believe 9/11 was an inside job. Apparently 20% think the world is flat. So the Great Awakening, okay, I mean, it's not bad. It's not a bad idea, but what you really need is political action. That's what you need. You got to understand that the system just wants you to drop out. For 90% of people, that involves Netflix and pornography. And it's just, oh, don't care about nothing. Oh, I don't care, whatever, politics. Nah, I'm just interested in sex and music and whatever, right? Video games. That works for 90%. And then you got a 10% that are interested in politics. So they get fed the doomer pill. They get fed the conspiracy pill. And they're not wrong. There is a conspiracy, but the conclusion of becoming a doomer is the wrong conclusion, because you're just giving up. And you're just adopting a negative outlook on life. And you're just going to be depressed, by the way. Because if you're not fighting, then you're being beaten. And if you're being beaten, you're going to be unhappy. You know, it's the fight or flight mechanism. You're encountering this really negative news on the internet of your country being destroyed. How do you react to it? Do you react to it in a positive way by saying, right, we're going to fix this, boom, boom, boom? Or do you just go back into yourself and into alcoholism and smoking weed or whatever and just say, oh, no, it's all messed up. Oh no. Oh, it's all a giant conspiracy. Oh, you're not voting Reform, are you? Oh, they're Zionists. Oh, you're so stupid. We only had one chance to fix everything, and that was with Moustache Man 70 years ago, and we messed that up, and now we're all just doomed. And it's like, oh my God almighty. It's depression. And they're crabs in a barrel, and they will drag everybody down with them. And partly, like I say, it's a natural psychological reaction for the reasons I've just given you, and partly it's a psyop. It's easy to make people depressed. It's easy to break the morale. So, like I just said, yes, there is a conspiracy. Like, I can't prove it or disprove it. I don't know. Is the world flat? I don't know. Do aliens exist? I don't know. I don't know. The answer is we're never going to find out until we get into government, and until we, get able to like talk to the space agency or whatever, actually get our hands on the secret files, right? So what's the point in worrying about this? If you want to, and most ordinary people also, they kind of are aware of conspiracies, but they're mostly concerned about taxation. That's what they're concerned about, paying the rent, paying the mortgage, and money. So you want to get them on your side. Talk about that. Talk about how mass immigration is driving down their wages and driving up the rent. That's what gets people on your side. So, I'm not saying don't talk about conspiracies. Definitely talk about them, but just keep your head screwed on and concentrate on government policy. That's the sweet spot. That's what's interesting. Don't lose yourself into la la land, because otherwise you're going to become an anarchist. And because that's the ultimate conspiracy theory conclusion, isn't it? If you follow David Icke to its ultimate, it's always going to be, well, the system's bad, man, and we want to be free, man. And it's like, okay, let's talk about that then. Let's live in an anarchy. Oh, great, we've got people killing each other. Fantastic. Food supply collapses. Technology collapses, we all go back to live on the land. And you might say, well, that's great. I'm a Luddite, and I think we should do that. And it's like, okay, but then you're just going to get conquered by China. And no anarchist I've ever spoken to has ever had an answer to that. So it's not that there's no truth in the idea of anarchy. There's definitely a truth in that people have a desire for liberty. They don't want to be crushed by this oppressive system that we live in. Well, that's very good. But to not want any government at all is just retarded, because you'll just end up getting conquered by somebody else. So you need a government, and the question then becomes, well, what is the best system of government? In my opinion, that's a constitutional monarchy. In fact, I would go further and say not only a constitutional monarchy mixed with referendums. Because you look at what's really the best country in the world, Switzerland, and they have referendums and the right to bear arms, and they're genuinely free, and the people in that country actually quite respect their government because they get to veto everything that they do. And nobody else talks about this, but I've talked about this in videos. My policy is make England Switzerland again. Referendums. Once you get the idea in your head, you'll never be able to forget it, because you'll be scratching your head thinking, why is Parliament making laws and I don't get the vote on it? And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I've never met somebody that's disagreed and said, no, referendums are terrible. But ordinary people anyway. It's internet people, they disagree with everything. So, the question, you can believe in all the conspiracies, but you're always going to come back to the question of how should we run the country? Okay, the basics. The basics. And the truth of the matter is, anarchy does not work. The only way that anarchy could work is if people had mystical powers and they were bulletproof. Maybe that's possible, I don't know. Because then you can just, fight anybody, right? But if you don't have mystic powers and you're not bulletproof, then you're going to need technology in order to defend your country and to defend yourself, which means you need industrialization, which means you need a country, right? You need a government, and you're part of the system. Because technology, all of technology is essentially just an arms race. That's all it is. So until you figure out how to shoot planes out of the sky with a bow and arrow, you're going to need a gun. And if you're going to need a gun, you're going to need factories, and you need a government, and computers and all of it. That's the trap that we're in. Essentially, the whole world is in a technology arms race. Basically, that's what's going on. So the Luddite conclusion does not work. The anarchist conclusion does not work. You will return to the question of how should we run the country. So give up this doomer nonsense. Give up all this nonsense of, oh, it's all a conspiracy, we can't do anything. Ask yourself the real practical question of how we should run the country, right? So bringing that all back to Churchill, yeah, the neo-Nazi could say, well, blah, 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 Churchill was part of a massive conspiracy. Okay, you can't prove it. And even if you can't prove it. I'm sorry. It's just conflicting evidence and it's unprovable. So I just don't accept it. And in response to that, he could say, well, you should look at all history from the point of view of the you-know-whos, right? So look at it from Israel's point of view. And it's not an unreasonable position to take, because essentially, if we're talking about the you-know-whos, we're saying they're the dominant political force in this world, because it's impossible to criticize them, and they've got all the money, right? So, okay, let's look at history from their point of view. If you do take that position, then instead, when you're talking about this whole Second World War, you'd really start looking at, instead of looking at the First World War first, you'd really look at the Ottoman Empire and the 1908 revolution, because that kind of fractured the empire. Because the goal is Zionism, right? The goal is to get Palestine and then turn that into Israel. So if you put Israel in the center of your mind, then from that point of view, the whole war between Germany and England just kind of becomes like this silly little proxy war, essentially, that was just done just to get Israel, essentially. So it's one way of looking at history, and it's an interesting way of looking at history. And you could argue that that's true, and that's the correct way to look at history. Okay, but that still doesn't prove that Churchill was bad. And we're still left with the basic necessity that we do need a triumphalist version of English history in order to encourage us to grow and to fight. You still need a story to tell the young men of the country. And telling the young men of the country that, putting Israel at the center of history is not going to work, okay? It's kind of the same thing. A lot of white nationalists, they want to tell the story of the white race as a sum total. And it's like, okay, it's one way of looking at history, but the white race as a sum total is not one combined political group. We're not politically combined. There is not one overarching structure that meshes us all together. So it's not a rallying point. What we have is our country with our parliament and our history. So we should rally behind that, essentially. But by the way, this is one of the reasons why I got involved, when I managed to see through the whole neo-Nazi thing in the first place, because people on the dissident right were so unhappy when we actually left the European Union. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. You guys aren't even really pro-Brexit, right? Like, what? You're not even nationalist at all. You're a Europeanist. You are a European nationalist. So I am a nationalist. That's our political structure. That is the thing that we should rally behind. And I believe that history is subjective. Therefore, Churchill good. Therefore, England good. It's heuristic thinking, and I 100% admit that. Basically, the thinking is England good, therefore Churchill good. That's it. And that is necessary. And you can't really prove me wrong, because I will not accept your secret documents. And even if they are true, it's just like, well, so what? We were still operating in our best interest to maintain a balance of power in Europe. That's just pragmatic realpolitik. We didn't know that we'd win the war at such great cost. We didn't know that Germany would team up with the Soviet Union to crush Poland. We didn't know all these things would happen. It's impossible for us to say. And then, leading on from that, we come to the final point, the final kind of like nail in the coffin of the whole neo-Nazi thing, and that is the question of, well, who actually started the war? Because let's give the neo-Nazi the benefit of the doubt. Let's say, okay, neo-Nazi, okay, David Irving was right, and there was a forum, and Churchill was an evil Satanist scumbag. Okay, my neo-Nazi friend, you were right. However, the question then comes, I don't believe this, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt, right? How did evil Churchill manage to start the war? Because this is the accusation that the neo-Nazis are pushing forward. How did this evil, dark, satanic Churchill manage to start the war and totally destroy Europe and blah, 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 genocide the white race? How did he manage to do it? Well, the only reason evil Churchill was able to do that was because idiot Moustache Man decided to break the Treaty of Versailles by invading Austria. And this is a subject which neo-Nazis just cannot comprehend in their brains because they're not capable of abstract thought. But I present to you an idea. What if Germany had just acted like Iran? Okay? What if Moustache Man had just been elected dictator of Germany, and what if he had just sat there? Do you see what I'm saying here? How would evil, satanic, demon-worshipping Churchill have started the war if pure, innocent, angelic, Jesus-like savior, Messiah, Moustache Man had never invaded Austria? How would Churchill have started the war? And the answer is he couldn't have. Now, of course, it was Neville Chamberlain that started the war, but nonetheless, the neo-Nazis will argue that it was the war lobby, right? It was Churchill pushing him towards it. How would Churchill have got his way if it wasn't for Germany literally invading countries in the middle of Europe 20 years after the First World War, right? So the neo-Nazis, in response to that, they'll say a number of things. They'll start to say that Austria was German and it was part of Germany and they wanted to be reunited. But Austria was never part of Germany. It may have been part of the Holy Roman Empire, but before the First World War, it was not part of Germany. It was a separate and distinct country. So let's get that straight, first of all. Secondly, there's a big question about whether or not Austria actually wanted to be united with Nazi Germany. They had their own dictator. They were predominantly Catholic. The Germans were Protestant. And a lot of the older generation was very wary of the neo-Nazis and of Moustache Man and of all their crazy ideas. So no, they didn't actually want to be united with that. Some of the younger generation did, but that was because of, how can I say it, moustache youth. That was because of the moustache youth problem, which was causing all kinds of issues. And, as I say, they already had a fascist dictatorship. It's not like Germans were being persecuted. It's not like they were in fear of invasion. It's not like it was a Weimar Republic and Moustache Man had to rescue them. It's not like anything like that. It's just Moustache Man wanted it, and so he took it. And they were going to have a referendum, but Moustache Man marched in there with his tanks and took over. And then they had a referendum afterwards, and big surprise, they won. And the neo-Nazis they'll roll out, pictures of, Germans waving flags and things like this, and a video of Moustache Man on the balcony and everyone's waving. Well, these were just moustache youth. There was a certain fraction that wanted it. So that's who was demonstrating. I could show you pictures of white English people waving a European flag. Right? This doesn't mean that the majority of people in England want to be part of the European Union. It's just Nazi propaganda. So And it's actually, the thing is, it's all actually besides the point. The point is that he broke the Treaty of Versailles. Germany broke the Treaty of Versailles, thus giving evil satanic Churchill the opportunity to start the war, because this is how the ball got rolling. First it's Austria, and then of course the neo-Nazis walk and say, oh, Germans were being persecuted in the Sudetenland. Perhaps it's because they didn't want flipping, perhaps it's because moustache youth was stirring up trouble. I mean, who knows? But then they get away with taking that, and then they're offered peace in our time. Moustache Man's even offered the old empire back that they lost in the First World War. But Moustache Man declines it, Germany declines it. Next thing you know, it's Poland, right? And before you know it, Germany's invaded 4 or 5 countries in the middle of Europe, and apparently none of it is their fault, right? Compare that to Iran, who the neocons have been trying to start a war with for a long, long time, and dropping bombs on them and trying to start revolutions within the country and murdering generals, and we've got the whole situation in Gaza and etc. Has Iran taken the bait? No, they're just sitting there waiting, playing the long game, waiting for the wind to change, waiting for the American empire to collapse or to at least diminish in strength. And they've allied themselves with Russia, and the wind is changing, and looks like they're gonna get away with it. That's the smart play. That is what Moustache Man could have done. That is what Germany could have done. And I say this because the neo-Nazis will say, well, there's that famous newspaper article where JUDEA declares war on Germany. And it's like, okay, some sanctions. So what? So what? It doesn't really mean anything, right? I kind of missed the part of history where Winston Churchill was planning to invade Germany. Like, I missed that. When did that happen? Oh, that's right, it didn't. What actually happened is there was a First World War started by Germany. Even if you don't think Germany started, let's give the neo-Nazis everything. Let's just say Churchill evil, Germany was innocent in the First World War. Poor Germany. Oh, poor Germany. Play my little violin for Germany. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. All right, all of this. Okay, and our hero, Moustache Man, was fighting against the international you-know-whos. Okay, well, the guy's an idiot because he gave them what they wanted by invading Austria and then Sudetenland and blah, 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 blah. Literally starting a war with England, which is going to mean a war with America eventually. Push comes to shove, starting a war against the you-know-whos who apparently control everything according to him. Why did he do it? Oh, and then on top of that, let's invade Russia in the winter. What a military genius this guy was. These Nazis like to make fun out of Churchill. Like take a look in the mirror, buddy. He got a few easy wins in the beginning, and then it all just collapsed. It's not a great military leader at all. Who invades Russia? Who does that? So, point being, try to imagine a world in which Moustache Man had just been the dictator of Germany and he just sat there. How would evil Churchill have started a war with him? Because bear in mind that the First World War had happened, regardless of who started it or whatever. It had happened. Millions of people had died, and everybody was traumatized by it, especially England, because all of our dead died fighting for France. Right? It's one thing for the French to be traumatized. We died fighting for another country, So, point being, nobody wanted another war. France didn't want it. England didn't want it. Poland didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. Nobody. So, Moustache Man could have sat there. He could have been the dictator of Germany for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And then he could have talked about all of his ideas about the you-know-whos and blah, 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 blah. Could have slowly won America over to his side and maybe the English and whoever. Could have done it. Didn't do it. Why? Because he was an aggressive psychopath. And he wrote a book called My Struggle. And in that book, he literally said that the Treaty of Versailles cannot be reversed without bloodshed. And of course, the neo-Nazis will say, well, that's just been made up. Well, it doesn't matter if it was made up or not. That is what happened. He broke the Treaty of Versailles and he invaded Austria. And the neo-Nazis will say, well, the Austrians wanted it. Well, I don't believe that, but it doesn't matter. He still broke the Treaty of Versailles, therefore giving evil Churchill the opportunity to start the evil war that he wanted to start. Okay? So the guy was an idiot, at best. At best. An idiot. And, bearing all this, I don't even hate him. I do realize that he's demonized as like the most evil man ever. I don't hate the guy. He's just one more European dictator king who wanted to start a war. Okay, big deal. No problem. I'm not against people starting wars. That's the way the world is. I think our relationship to him should be the same as our relationship with Napoleon. Napoleon started a war, trashed Europe, invaded Russia, and then was squashed. Moustache Man did the same thing. So, okay, no big deal. He had some crazy ideas. All right, whatever. But he's not our hero. You can admire him because he had balls. And I get it that people are attracted to the symbols and to the military parades and so on and so forth. I get it. I get that that he is psychologically the bogeyman, the bad guy, the evil. This is the propaganda that's been put out by Hollywood and so on and so forth. He's the most evil person that ever lived ever. And I get that. Now we're backed into a corner. It's like, what, you want to side with the baddest, toughest, meanest white guy that ever lived. So you kind of side with him. Like, I do understand psychologically what's happening. I see the attraction. But ultimately, you got to side with your own country. And I like to crack jokes. I mean, I've cracked jokes before. Doing the Roman salutes and, saying Moustache Man was right. I mean, it's funny. It winds people up. The memes kind of wind people up. But it should be done in a way that's just a joke. You should understand that it's a joke. And then understand underneath all that, okay, actually, this was an idiot that burned Europe to the ground. He started a war that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted that war. And he started that war. And that's why he should be, I don't want to say hated, but that's why he's not our hero. Not because of his racial ideas, which weren't that bad. Not because of the shower rooms, which probably never happened. But because he started a war, right? He's not our hero. That's it. And in reaction to that, the neo-Nazi might say, might take one last stab at it. He might say, well, Moustache Man wanted to fight the Soviet Union. They were the real danger. And he wanted to protect, it's so funny, he wanted to protect Europe from the Soviet Union. Well, what actually happened? He made a deal with the Soviet Union and basically gave the whole of Eastern Europe to them. Okay? Gave half of Poland to them, and they also moved in with their armies and took a whole bunch of other countries as well. And then he declared war on them, and they had to conquer the land which he'd just given to them. I mean, this is just retarded. Now, what he could have done, sat there in Germany, being peaceful, and he could have allied with Poland and help defend Poland from Soviet attack. And then the Russians would have had to get all the way through Poland and some other countries first before getting to Germany. That's what he could have done, but he didn't do it. Why? Because he was a psycho. He was a nutcase. He was high on his own supply. He was high on amphetamine, right? So he started a war, burned Europe to the ground. That's it. Simple, really. Simple and straightforward if you think about it. So that's kind of pretty much all I have to say. I mean, in reaction to all that, the neo-Nazi might say, well, what about the shower rooms? And the answer is, well, what about them? Okay, the shower rooms are fake. Fine. And yes, I accept that the shower rooms are the foundation for modern civilization. I understand that. Because if you argue with anybody on the internet, they'll call you Moustache Man, and Moustache Man is the most evil man that ever lived. Why? Because he did the shower rooms, and the shower rooms is the most evil thing that ever happened in the world ever. And in order to prevent shower rooms from happening ever again, we have to have multiculturalism and gay sex. Okay? That is essentially the foundational argument that the whole of the modern world is running on. So I fully recognize this. Okay? But the question is, well, what's the answer to this? And the first answer is, well, we didn't do it. Okay, that was Moustache Man, not us. It's a German war crime. It's not an English war crime. And like I already said, the narrative is like, we tried to help you guys, the you-know-whos, and look how you've betrayed us. And now you're trying to make us feel guilty for the shower rooms, something that we didn't even do. So that's the first answer. On a deeper level, it's actually kind of complicated, and it's actually kind of smoke and mirrors, to be honest with you. But because on a deeper level, it's like, okay, let's talk about the actual conspiracy. Does it make sense? Wooden doors? Does it make sense? No. All right. So it doesn't make sense. But it's a trap. Because if you start defending it or saying that it didn't happen, automatically you fall into this trap of defending Moustache Man, and then all of a sudden you're a neo-Nazi. So you got to be very, very careful. And I suppose it really depends who you're talking to. Are you talking to somebody that's intelligent, that can understand what you're saying, or are you talking to a left-wing idiot? We all, generally speaking, we all moderate our speech to a certain extent depending on who we're talking to. So if you're talking to somebody intelligent, then just explain it in the way I've just explained it. Just tell them what I've just been saying for the last 2.5 hours. If you're talking to an idiot, then just say, it's a German war crime, we didn't do it, right? And also, on another level, if you actually look at the Wikipedia definition, you may not like Wikipedia definitions, but whatever. It says the big H, right, actually refers not just to the shower rooms, but to all of the murders of all of the you-know-whos all across Europe by the Nazis. And I'm pretty 100% certain that the Nazis definitely did kill some you-know-whos. And again, like, neo-Nazis might deny this, but I don't believe that at all. I mean, even if Moustache Man had tried to stop them, how could he stop them in the middle of all that chaos and warfare? After all of his rhetoric, of course, some German soldiers are going to take the law into their own hands, right? So definitely a lot of innocent civilians died, and you may say you don't care about that, and it's like, okay, well, you know. All right, but nonetheless, it happened. And so if you deny that it happened, it kind of makes it look like you're defending the crime. Even though you may only want to be saying that the shower rooms didn't happen, you end up falling into the trap where you're defending the whole thing, right? Everything else that happened. And you say, no, none of that happened either. And it's like, well, yeah, it definitely did, actually. Yeah, definitely a lot of civilians got murdered. Okay, so best just to take the point that yeah, lots of people died in that war, and yeah, it's Moustache Man's fault because he started the flipping war. And he did. That's the real simple answer. And when you start a war, civilians die. And that's it. So what's really the point in defending the big H and kicking up a fuss about it and saying that it didn't happen? Better to just sidestep it altogether and just say, well, it's a German war crime. It's got nothing to do with us, right? Essentially. And then you just put it in the same basket as all of the war crimes, right? All of the murders and all of the destruction and all of the civilian deaths. And then it becomes clearer, and then it's just a case of, well, yeah, stupid guys started a war and killed a bunch of people. And it's no longer something magical. And you could say in response to that, well, yeah, but the guys that run Hollywood, they keep pushing it. And it's like, well, so what? Create a counter narrative. Don't step into their narrative and their frame by becoming the idiot that they want you to be. But again, this is the way that the secret neo-Nazis deal with it. They just they want to avoid it altogether and step over the history and ignore it. But you can't do that. But if you want to be an ethno-nationalist or any kind of nationalist, you have to find your strength in your history, which means you've got to talk about all of history, from Hengist and Horsa to Alfred the Great to William the Bastard to Edward Longshanks to Henry VIII to the English Civil War to the Victorian Empire, to all of it. You have to talk about all of it. And it's very interesting to note that secret neo-Nazis don't really do that. They're very, very reactionary. They're very, very obsessed with, they're obsessed with the Second World War, but they won't talk about it. but they don't dig into English history because they can't, because their kind of brains are shut down, because they're not allowed to talk about the Second World War, so they don't end up talking about anything. So they end up adopting a very, very reactionary position to everything, where they just like point at the news and like, oh look, this is bad, and then they'll talk about abstractions. Then it's, oh, Julius Evola, and oh, I have a political theory that this, that, and this, and whatever, and it's all very abstract and in your head. And why are they forced into that abstract realm? Because they can't talk about history. See what I'm saying? But history is the solution to all of this. You want to save your country, you got to talk about history. But you know, don't take my word for it. Look at the leaders of the dissident right in England. When's the last time you've seen them reading, I don't know, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or Chaucer? Or, I mean, the whole joke is that Sargon of Akkad said, do you even read Locke? And everybody laughed at him. And it's like, well, you're totally stupid. Like, why are you laughing at him? That's our history. That's our political history. Hobbes, Locke, all of it. Milton. I mean, we should be reading all of these books and talking about them and chewing them over and finding inspiration from them. But the stupid, retarded, moronic, secret neo-Nazis don't do that. They're just spending their time reading German idealism and Evola. We've got like one of the greatest cultures in the world, some of the greatest literature in the world, and they don't tap into it. It's incredible. It's such a waste. We could easily rally the people of our country behind us if we just read our great literature and read our great works of philosophy and read our great history. Aye, but there you go, there you go. And that's pretty much everything I want to say. That's the essence of my argument. Some people may say, again, avoid the question, you can't do that. Some people may say, well, it's 50-50. Well, the centre does not hold. If you try and avoid the argument, then on the internet, the neo-Nazis will just win. They'll just take that ground. So you have to take a strong stance, and you have to say, I love Winston Churchill and I love Bomber Harris, and let's invade Germany again. That's literally the only way you can deal with these people. If you just try and be like a good little boy and say, oh, I don't want to upset my internet friends, then they'll win the debate because they'll move into that territory and take it, essentially. You have to take a strong stance. So again, to recap, my argument is that Winston Churchill did not start the war. Moustache Man started it by breaking the Treaty of Versailles, and also we were acting in our own interests to defend the British Empire and to defend our power as a global superpower. We were acting in our interest, and unfortunately things all went a bit pear-shaped. That's why it's hard to defend. It's kind of hard to defend because everything got messed up, But then another point that could be made is that by blaming everything on Churchill, you avoid the real villain. Because who's really the actual great destroyer of England? Well, it's Attlee. He's the one that came in and created the NHS and brought all the mass immigration in. And of course, the neo-Nazis will never do that because they probably, on some level, they like Attlee because they're all socialists, and Attlee was a socialist, you see? And then again, on another level, like I think I already said this before, but by blaming everything on Churchill, the Americans get away with everything because the Americans have been the driving force of culture and multiculturalism and mass immigration and the sexual revolution, and they don't want to take the blame for it. That's why they go on the internet and blame everything on Churchill. So many angles. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. You may be wondering, well, you've convinced me, Alfred. You've convinced me. What do I do now? Well, share the video with your friends. Share the video with the Civnats. My idea is that there needs to be an English ethno-nationalist alliance with the English Civnats, essentially. Like I say, like two tuning forks playing the same tune. Okay? Again, this is one of the problems with the secret neo-Nazis. They hate the Civnats and they cause division. The classic division being all of the hatred poured against Sargon of Akkad, who is the best of our generation of young civnats. I mean, he's created the Lotus Eaters. He's brought a whole group of men together and actually built something. It's incredible what he's achieved. And he's anti-immigration. So he should be like our number one ally. All those young guys that are with him, they all understand internet culture, right? They're all complaining about infinity Africans. So we should be deeply allied with him, but because the entire secret neo-Nazi thing is a psyop, and because of the mentality of the people involved with it, they just pour scorn and cause a division. So we need to muscle the secret neo-Nazis aside, and we need to have a good cop, bad cop relationship with Sargon and with other civnat e-celebs, British e-celebs. Essentially where the ethno-nats get to be the bad cops, the anonymous bad cops on the internet, and the civnats get to say the more moderate stuff out in the open with their faces behind it. And we can work together, push policies forward, essentially. I mean, I've been waiting for a long time I've been saying this for years, actually. Like, people were constantly asking me, like, well, who are you going to vote for? And it's like, well, just give me a party led by a white man who wants to stop immigration. And it's appeared. We've got Richard Tice. It's happened. It's just nobody's rallied behind him. But nonetheless, the idea of a total ban of immigration has now entered into the public consciousness and has become the kind of civnat or dissident civnat standard. So that's progress. And everybody's talking about anti-white racism. So progress is being made. Progress is being made. It's not all bad. But that's how we do it. That's how we win, basically. We need to create an English ethno-nationalism. We need to create the memes. We need to create the videos. We need to create the podcasts. We need to write the books. We need to build the whole thing. We need to work hand in hand with the civnats. And we need to push forwards. And that's it, in a constructive and a positive way, instead of just waiting for, I don't know, some kind of economic collapse, or even worse, I haven't mentioned any of this, or embracing accelerationism. And this is another problem with secret neo-Nazis. Let's vote for Labour and everything will get destroyed, and then there'll be a revolution, right? How many times have I heard this? I mean, by the way, do I have to point out the fact that I'm right about everything? I did start a live stream called The Batten Gang 5 years ago now, I guess. 5 years ago. Why? Because we had the leader of UKIP. His name was Jared Batten. He was on the TV and he was talking about Pakistani rape gangs. And I said, that's our guy. We got to rally behind that guy. People have got to join UKIP. That's our Donald Trump. Let's go. And what did all the dissident right say? The English dissident right. Oh no, he's a Zionist. They did nothing. Sargon joined. He brought 10, 20,000 people into UKIP, young people. And then, of course, Farage stabbed Batten in the back, and different things happened, and blah, blah, blah. Batten was kicked out. And everybody on the dissident right celebrated. And there's been a void in British politics ever since. And now this Reform Party is starting to fill the void, and GB News is there, and things have changed. But we had a golden opportunity with Batten. We had it. We could have filled that party up. If the British dissident right had supported Batten instead of being against him, he could have stayed in power, and he could have continued to lead, and we could have a UKIP with 100,000 or 200,000 members by now, and it would probably be a little bit better than this whole Richard Tice thing, which is a little bit. It's a party, but it's a little bit of a dictatorship or whatever. It's the best thing we've got now, so we've got to vote for it. But nonetheless, point I'm making is I supported Batten, and nobody else did, and then it was destroyed. It was a giant missed opportunity, and these people went on to create their own political organisation, which has achieved absolutely nothing. It's achieved nothing. I mean, let's just get this really straight here. The alt-right has basically achieved nothing. They haven't built anything. They haven't written any books. They haven't. What are they doing? It's the same boring old characters on the internet, recycling the same boring old talking points. And it's like, okay, I mean, there's a gradually growing awareness of white identity and a gradual growing awareness of the you-know-whos, but it's not like there's been a major victory, I wouldn't say. So maybe we should try something new, I don't know. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening. If you like the video, spread it by word of mouth, okay? And tell the Civnats to watch it. Tell Sargon to watch it, if he will. And let's just push forward. And let's do a book club as well. I've got that lined up. That's the real solution. You want to know the real 100% long-term solution to all our problems? The book club. Read the books. Talk about the books. Chew over the knowledge. Why are we dying? Why are we being destroyed? It's because we've forgotten our history. And we've forgotten our great works of literature, and we've forgotten our philosophy. We've forgotten it. And if you forget it, you get wiped out. So the real permanent, long-term solution is to read the books, do your homework, talk over the ideas, create an educated generation of men that's able to push aside the old, corrupt intelligentsia, essentially. But anyway, I've been saying enough. All right, thank you very much for listening. All right, God bless. Right, hello everyone. So I've just listened to what I've said, and I wanted to make just a couple more points, and then I'm going to close the video down. Right, first of all, I'd like to talk about a guy called David Miat, who was a hardcore, far-right, British neo-Nazi who was associated with Combat 18, but who later on converted to Islam. And if you look him up on the Wikipedia, you can see him with his Islamic clothes on. He ended up giving up neo-Nazism and converting to Islam. Why did he do this? He did this, in my opinion, because he was just an anti-establishment guy. He just hated the system, he hated the government, he hated the man, he had a chip on his shoulder, he didn't like the country, he didn't like the people in charge, he was anti-English, fundamentally. And so he turned to neo-Nazism as a way of expressing his anti-English sentiment, but then when that wasn't hardcore enough, he ended up converting to Islam. Which is just another way of saying, fuck you, dad. Fuck you, mum and dad. I'm gonna be a Muslim, basically. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are a lot of people out there who just have an anti-English sentiment. They have this rebellious anti-English sentiment, and they are using secret neo-Nazism as a way of expressing their anti-English sentiment, or at least they're psychologically drawn to the movement as a way of expressing their anti-English sentiment. I mean, there's also other things going on here. I mean, you also have, they want to be part of something cool and trendy and edgy, kind of like the Goths. They want to be weird. There's that also. But a lot of it's an anti-English sentiment. And you can see a lot of people doing this. You can see basically laughing as Muslims, right? And sympathizing with the Palestinians. And I mean, if push came to shove and you forced me to pick a side in that conflict between Israel and Palestine, I'd side with the Palestinians, right? Because why not, right? It's funny. But do I think for a moment that the Palestinians are on our side? No. They hate us as much as the you-know-whos do. So it's a joke. I mean, you can say it online, but you got to realize that the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend, right? Same goes for Moustache Man, right? The enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend, right? But whatever the case, the point I'm trying to make is that there are some people who just have a kind of anti-establishment attitude, and neo-Nazism is just a way of expressing that attitude. This, in a similar kind of way, this works with the Americans. The Americans just don't like the English, and so they hate Churchill. In another similar way, this goes for the ancient 1,500-year-old Celtic Saxon conflict. Okay, of course, the Germanic Anglo-Saxons, we came over in, nobody really knows when we came over. Let's just say it's roughly 500 AD, right? With Hengist and Horsa. And the British, or the original inhabitants of this island, which were known as the British, now they're called the Welsh, they invited us over to protect them from the Scottish. Scottish people are Irish. They are Gaelic, okay? So we came over to fight with the Scottish, essentially, and this war's been going on ever since. So there's an ancient ethnic race war going on in this country between quote-unquote Celtic people and quote-unquote Anglo-Saxons, right? So this will often spill over into neo-Nazism, because the Irish and the Scottish, they love to love Moustache Man, and they love to hate Winston Churchill. Why? Because they've got a 1,500-year-old gripe against the English. So be wary of this. And I'm not anti-Celtic, I'm not anti-Gaelic. I think the solution to this endless war is for young Prince George to marry an Irish girl, right? That'll solve the whole thing. And then we can get Ireland back into the Union, and we will be a united British Isles again. And that's the solution, in my opinion. But again, be wary of who you're talking to. When you're discussing the neo-Nazi subject matter, when you're talking about the Second World War on the internet with random people, you got to ask yourself the question, whose side are they on? If they're an American, they probably just don't like you. If they're Scottish or they're Irish, they probably just don't like you. They don't like the English, right? A similar thing goes for a lot of homosexuals, right? Who just they're just anti-establishment, essentially. A lot of homosexuals will be attracted to ethno-nationalism, because obviously they go through an identity crisis. Am I gay? Am I not gay? And which makes them ask themselves all kinds of questions, and then they discover that they're white. But they're also, for obvious reasons, slightly anti-establishment. Also, there was a lot of homosexual activity in the Nazi movement, right? Moustache Man had homosexuals in prominent positions within National Socialism. And also, I think that fascism itself is just a totalitarian philosophy, and it's about power, and it's about dominance, and homosexuality is about power and dominance. It's about making another man submit. It's about who's being the top and who's the bottom, right? And I say this because you look at the way that Muslims do gay sex, right? In the Islamic world, if you are a top, you are not considered to be gay. That means if you're the person that's doing the penetration, you're not gay. You're only gay if you're taking it, essentially. This is the way that these people think. So why do they do it? Well, it's an act of dominance over another man. You can see blacks do this in the ghettos. Sometimes, they'll get another black guy to suck their pee-pee, and they put a gun against his head, and then they'll film it. Right? It's a way of making another man submit to you. It's about dominance. So this is a big part of homosexual sexuality, and fascism is about dominance. Fascism is a totalitarian philosophy. It's about taking people's liberty away. It's about pushing people around and telling them what to do. So homosexuals are naturally going to be attracted to that, because that's the kind of thing they're into, dominating. If you want a really truly masculine ideology, you want some form of libertarian. Ideally, an ethno-libertarianism. That's what you really want. But nonetheless, and this is a very interesting thing as well, like the continuous, endless debate, the individualist against the collectivist, right? All these secret neo-Nazis, they like say, collectivism is feminine by its very nature. Individualism is masculine, because it means one man thinking for himself, doing his own thing. He has freedom of choice. And this does come from capitalism, and yes, this ultimately comes from the Reformation itself. It comes from European people freeing themselves from Catholic tyranny and being able to stand up and saying, I will worship God in whatever way I want. I will have religious freedom. That is the real source of freedom of speech and individualism and libertarianism for the last 500 years. So yes, individualism is good, because individualism means that you can communicate with God and you can serve God in your own way without some religion forcing you to do it in the way that they want you to do it. This means that you can discover the truth. This means that you need freedom of speech so that you can say whatever you want, so that you can worship God in whatever way that you want, so that you can discover the truth. As soon as you start having censorship, as soon as you start having some large organization telling you what you can say and you can't say, then the truth will become hidden. This is why you have to have freedom of speech. Fascism is against freedom of speech. They sometimes pretend that they're not, but they're all on the internet constantly saying, we need censorship, we need to shut this down. We don't need to shut anything down. Pornography is not the problem. The problem is that men don't have control over their women. If men had legal control over the women, if we take the vote away from women, if we bring back laws of coverture, then women will be under control. And if women are under control, then every man will be able to get a wife. Because no man wants his daughter to be a whore, so men will get their daughters married off. And if every man has a wife to have sex with, a young wife, then they're not going to be watching porn all the time. Okay? So censoring porn is not going to solve the root cause of the problem. Okay, I'm just addressing the porn question because that's mostly what they talk about when they're talking about censorship, right? Censorship is not the solution, in my opinion. What we need is total freedom of speech so that the truth can come out. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. But what I'm trying to say is fascists and neo-Nazis, they don't believe in freedom of speech. They want to censor. They want to shut everybody up. What is this about? This is all about power. This is all about domination. And this is very feminine. Collectivism is very feminine in its nature. Masculinity will naturally... a masculine man will naturally be drawn towards freedom of speech and standing on his own feet and working for himself, not working for the government. So bear that in mind. Coming back to the point I was making, yeah, there's a lot of, like I say, you talk to people on the internet about these subject matters, you're going to find a lot of Americans who are anti-English, gays that are anti-English, Celtic people that are anti-English, Europeans that are anti-English, and they get involved with ethno-nationalism and it transforms into hatred of Churchill. Also, you've got a lot of Northerners. In England, there is a north-south divide. A lot of Northerners are attracted to socialism. A lot of Northerners think that capitalist is a Southern thing, and they just kind of hate the South. They got a chip on their shoulder because their granddad used to work down the mines, and Margaret Thatcher shut the mines down, and they're just like slightly, you know, obviously I'm not against Northerners, by the way, and I'm not against Irish people, and I'm not against American people. Okay, we're all white, we're all under attack. I'm just pointing out to you that different people coming from different backgrounds and for various different reasons, because of the background that they come from, they're going to be slightly anti-English and slightly anti-establishment, slightly anti-monarchy and slightly anti-British Empire, and that translates easily into being anti-Churchill, and then they get shifted over into the secret neo-Nazi camp. That's what's going on. So be wary of that. Be wary of Northerners with their socialist ideals. Be wary of it. In addition, a lot of half-castes, right? A lot of neo-Nazi half-castes. Okay, so they're not... This is why I think I mentioned this earlier. Like, people think that the National Socialists were super racist. They're not really. It's more of an ideology of socialism than anything. And it is a socialist ideology. Let's get that straight. It is an extension of... Well, I mean, it's not that far away from Karl Marx, is it? It's not that far away from National Bolshevism, to be honest with you. I would definitely prefer a fascist dictatorship to a communist dictatorship. And I think Mussolini was kind of a hero for saving Italy from a communist revolution. So I'd rather have a Mussolini than the alternative. And I'm definitely on Franco's side. So it's not that I'm completely 100% anti-fascist. Fascism is at least nationalistic and vaguely conservative, or at least vaguely masculine. So it's better than communism, but still, it's not the best form of government. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that, yeah, a lot of half-caste people are attracted to National Socialism because it is an ideology. It's an ideology it's a socialist ideology, and so they fit in. And this is what happens. I mean, I don't know, look at the patriotic alternative and look how many brown people that have been associated with that organization, right? Look at, anyway, I promised on this video I wouldn't name names, okay? I was going to try and keep this video clean, but just have a look at who on the internet is worshipping Moustache Man, and you'll realize that a lot of half-caste people are attracted to that ideology. Because they won't be accepted by me, because I'm English and I'm white and I got blue eyes and white skin, you know what I mean? And like I don't really want half-caste people to be in this country. I mean, I'm 50-50, you know, we could work something out maybe, I don't know. But they ain't English, not really, right? But they all get embraced by and accepted by the National Socialist movement, because the National Socialist movement is a coalition of people who hate Churchill. It's all about hatred of Churchill, very much like the left wing. The left wing is a coalition of gays and feminists and Muslims, right? Gays, feminists and Muslims don't like each other, but they all hate the white man, so they team up together against the white man in a similar way. Secret neo-Nazis, you've got all these different groups of people. They all just hate Churchill and they hate the British Empire, because that's what Churchill represents. That's what he was trying to protect, the British Empire. And they hated it and they want to tear it down. The monarchy as well. Want to tear it down. They want to tear down England. So bear that in mind when you are having these conversations with people. As I said it before, I'll say it again. The white nationalist movement is a pro-white movement, but it is also an anti-English movement. That is what it is. Oh, be proud of being white. Be proud of being white, but be ashamed of being English and apologize for Dresden. That is what they are asking of you. So be very wary of that. Moving on from that point, another point I wanted to mention was that revolutions don't work. Americans are deluded. They think that they had a revolution which was spontaneous to overthrow the evil British. Actually, that revolution was paid for by the French and organized by the Masons. But it's a very dangerous revolution because it's fixed in their head this idea that they can overthrow the government. Now, I am aware there are about 70 million armed Americans. So, you know, that's a pretty big army. Maybe they do have a chance of overthrowing the American government. I mean, I'm not saying a spontaneous revolution is completely impossible, but generally speaking, a real revolution that is successful is usually paid for by outside elements. And at the very least, it has to have very strong leadership. I mean, we've just seen Sri Lanka, right? They stormed parliament, so it's not that it's totally impossible. It's just that they have a myth of spontaneous revolution, and they're all sitting there with all their guns, and they're wondering why it hasn't happened. When's the second great revolution going to happen? When are they going to tear down Washington? It's because they're not realizing that the first revolution that they had was paid for and organized by the French. So it's a total delusion. And they're spreading this delusion all across the world. And it's very prominent in white nationalist circles. Oh, we're going to have a revolution. We're going to overthrow the government. No, we're not. No, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen anytime soon. But it is a good excuse for people, because people, generally speaking, they don't want to put in the hard work. and they don't want to, they don't want to do anything positive or constructive. And so they just want to sit on the internet and say, oh, there'll be a revolution one day. Oh, well, there's not, there's not. Like, I mean, just to drive the point home, like, we have had Pakistani men come to our country and we've had them rape schoolgirls. That's the line, dude. That is, if ever there's a line in the sand, that's it. And English men have tolerated that, and they have not rioted, they have not burned anything down. What does that mean? It means that Englishmen are totally psychologically broken. They're not going to get violent. They're not going to have a revolution. It's not going to happen. I mean, I remember listening to this. I remember very clearly an interview with Katie Hopkins in a cab like 5-6 years ago. And she was like, oh, there's such a tension in the air. This is a time when Tommy Robinson was running around the place. There's a tension in the air. Something's going to happen. It's like, well, 6 years later, nothing's happened. So nothing's going to happen. There is not going to be a violent revolution. No, stop it. Stop it with this silly idea. Moving on from that point, another point I wanted to make was that kind of a related point. But once you've taken a pro-Anglosphere position, and because the Anglosphere is essentially kind of an empire, right? If you're pro-American empire, it's going to be much easier for the powers that be to listen to us, the elites. Because all I'm proposing is actually a continuation of the American empire, just with stop the immigration and listen to an English lobby instead of an Israeli lobby. Okay, and what I'm trying to say here is that if you're going banging your fist and saying we want to tear the government down, then the government's not going to listen to you. If, on the other hand, you say, okay, we'll keep NATO, right? Obviously, I'm against the war with Russia, by the way, provoking Russia into a war. But whatever the case, we'll say we'll keep NATO, we'll keep all these giant globalist structures, or at least we'll keep some of them, right? But we're just going to make it pro-white, and we're going to stop the mass immigration, and we'll start to kick the foreigners out, and we'll make it pro-English instead of pro-Israeli. Essentially, we're going to muscle out the Israeli lobby and replace it with an English lobby. If you approach from that kind of point of view, then the elites, the people in power, the people with the money, the people that control this world, they might scratch their heads and think, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Because they remember the British Empire. They remember how good things used to be. They can see how messed up things are now. But they don't want to associate themselves with a bunch of crazy, grubby, internet secret neo-Nazis. But if you approach them with a sane conception, maybe they'll listen. And following on from that point, I'd also like to add that I've found it much easier to talk to civic nationalists about the you-know-whos now that I've rejected Moustache Man, essentially. And I've discovered personally with interactions with people on Twitter and in DMs and so on and so forth, that a lot of these people, they just avoid the question of the you-know-whos because they don't like the Nazi stuff, right? It turns them off. They don't like it. They don't want to be associated with it. And so they never look very deeply into that subject matter. But once you've overcome that and you've made it clear that you're not a secret neo-Nazi, all of a sudden their ears open up and they're able to hear, and you are much more able to explain race realism and the question of the you-know-whos to them. So you have to understand, I mean, this is the point I've been making through the entire video. People don't like Moustache Man. That's why they're not listening. That's why the British public aren't listening. That's why the civnats on the internet aren't listening. People don't like Moustache Man. They don't like him. It's not that they're stupid. It's not that they are unable to understand race realism or the you-know-whos. It's just they don't like Moustache Man. And that is turning them off, and that is stopping them from engaging with this subject matter. So that's pretty much all I got to say, I think. I'm going to go for a walk, and I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to finish this thing. I mean, one last thing I would say would be that a lot of these people, most of these people got the whole lockdown wrong. They sided with the government when the government locked us down. They sided with the vaccine. I mean, this is insane. I don't know. I don't know why they've got any credibility at all, to be honest with you, after doing that. That should really wake you up. I was against lockdown right from the beginning. Before they even rolled out the vaccine, I said, I'm not taking that vaccine. Right from the beginning. But these people, a lot of secret neo-Nazis, they're so absorbed in their little world, and they're so... It's a problem that people face when they discover a truth which is really kind of secret and difficult to access. Because when it comes to secret neo-Nazis, they are very close to the truth, because the racial question is the most taboo question in this world, right? You can talk about flat earth, you can talk about lizards, you can talk about the Illuminati, you can talk about all kinds of things, and you'll be okay. But as soon as you start talking about race realism and the you-know-whos, you're going to have a huge problem. So these people are much closer to the truth than most other people, but it kind of affects their brains a little bit, because then they get proud, essentially, and they just think, oh, I know what's going on, I know everything because I know about the you-know-whos, and I don't need, like, oh, you stupid conspiracy theorists, you don't understand this question, I'm so much more cleverer than you because I understand race realism. And it's like, well, you know, you end up taking a vaccine then, don't you? You absolute retard. So this is a huge problem. This pride is a huge problem. These people think they have the answer to everything when they don't. And it made them support the lockdown. So they need, yeah, dude, you should never give up your quest for the truth, I suppose. And I'll go on from this and just say that I think the natural allies for the ethno-nationalist movement should be the conspiracy theorists, because they're already on the internet. They're already talking about how the government hates them, right? And that's the major psychological step which most people are unwilling to take, because it's very difficult to accept that the government doesn't like you, because it's like accepting that your mum and dad doesn't like you, and it makes the world into a threatening place, essentially. And most people aren't really ready for that. But the conspiracy theorists have already taken that step, and they're already asking questions. So they should naturally be allied with the ethno-nats. They should be naturally flowing in that direction, but they're not. Because, well, firstly, because they don't like Moustache Man, but secondly, because ethno-nationalists, not all of them, by the way, but a lot of them, won't talk about 9/11 being an inside job, basically, right? And again, this is... Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them are so wrapped up and they're so focused on ethno-nationalism and on optics and on propaganda that they don't want to talk about anything else. It's like their minds get shut down. They're not thinking in a creative way anymore. They're not curious about the world anymore. They just think there's this one problem, and I've got to be very careful about what I say, and I have to say the right message with the right optics, and we're just going to talk about this. And it's really boring, to be honest with you. It's just boring, basically. I can't watch most ethno-nationalist content because it's just like the same boilerplate explanation of everything that comes. Any news event that happens, it's like they react with the same reactions and the same, they say the same things, and they never go any deeper. Then they never talk about other interesting subject matters. It's just stuck. And they're like this because, like I say, it's fascist, it's totalitarian, and they are obsessed with optics. And they're obsessed with optics because they got something to hide. They want to hide the fact that they love Moustache Man. And so their minds end up in a trap. This is why some of them burn out. A lot of them burn out. Partly also because it's a psyop and there's so much gossip and weirdness. But partly also because it's just intellectually not interesting after a while. Because once you've realized race realism and the you-know-whos, it's like, okay, well, I get it. What's next, right? What else can we talk about? Like, what's going on with the economy? That's a classic one. A lot of ethno-nats will not talk about economics. They won't and they'll specifically not talk about it. They'll deliberately not talk about it. They'll say that, oh, we can't discuss that because the only thing that matters is race, and who cares about economics? It's like, well, mate, you're dumb, right? You are so dumb. You can't talk about politics and not talk about economics. The two go hand in hand, right? Yes, you are correct that race realism is more important than economics. Yes, because you can destroy the economy and you can rebuild it. But once you've destroyed your race, once you've become mixed race, you can't go back. So yeah, race is the most important subject matter, but economics is also important, and it's also what the British public care about. British public, unfortunately, they don't really care about Pakistani rape gangs. They don't really care about transgenderism. They don't care. They care about paying the rent. They care about paying their mortgage. They care about taxes. They care about these kinds of things. They care about the economy. And so if you want to get them on your side, you have to have good economic policies, right? And you should explain to them the number one argument, if you want to get them on your side, is you should explain that mass immigration is bad for the economy. It's good for the rich, in a way. More people paying more taxes, more people buying stuff in Tesco's, right? So there are some rich landlords that profit from it and some rich businesses that profit from it. But for your average Brit, it's bad because it drives down the standard of life. It drives down your wages and it drives your rent up. That's the number one talking point. But a lot of ethno-nats won't address that because they don't want to get into any kind of economic conversation. Again, why don't they want to do this? Because they're socialists and they don't want to. They don't want to discuss socialism. So they just say, we're not going to discuss economics. That's not interesting to us. But in reality, what they're really saying is, don't question my socialist opinions. Right? So it's a huge mistake. And of course, you want to see through socialism. Once you understand that gold and silver are the real money, then all of a sudden all your socialist ideas just collapse. Boom, gone. Okay, because the only reason you can pay for big government is if you're printing money, essentially. So that's another final point. Right, hello everyone. So I went for a walk. I've come back. I've got a few more things I'd like to say. First of all, I would like to talk about the female question. Why? Because this video presentation is rapidly transforming into a kind of all-round introduction to the way I think about things. But also because there's a lot of slander that's been said about me on the internet. Obviously, when you're dealing with the dissident right and you're dealing with secret neo-Nazis, you have to understand these people. As I said before, these people are in bed with the you-know-whos. It is a controlled opposition movement. It is a psyop. It is designed to demoralize people. It is designed specifically to make the English people follow Moustache Man, because the you-know-whos understand that the British public will never rally behind Moustache Man. And it's also kind of like a spy network, which just keeps tabs on people. And we all know that one of the favorite tactics of the you-know-whos is to spread slander and gossip about people. So a lot of slander has been said about me. A lot of people have made out that I'm very, very anti-woman, some kind of misogynist. So, just don't believe anything that you hear about me on the internet, basically. Let me just put that out there straight away. When it comes to the female question, my opinion is essentially I am a Victorian. I mean, this is one reason why I believe in what I believe in, because it just makes my position so much clearer. If I approach somebody in the street and I say, oh, I've read Julius Evola and I love Moustache Man, they're going to think I'm a lunatic. However, if I approach somebody in the street and I say, well, I'm a Victorian, I believe in Victorian morality and the Victorian legal system, and I think we should go back to that because that worked, then all of a sudden I am a traditionalist and I am in line with British culture. And so people are going to be much more willing to hear what I have to say. I could continue that thought on and say this is another reason why we should read Hobbes and Locke and all of the British philosophers, because then people will listen. If you approach any kind of intellectual and you start talking about Eveler, they're going to think, oh, well, whatever, German idealism, who cares? If you approach somebody and you start talking about Hobbes, then they kind of got to listen, because anybody that studies political science in this country will have to read Hobbes and Locke. But anyway, back to the female question. I am a Victorian, which means that I don't think women should vote, and I also believe in laws of coverture, and I believe that men should protect women, essentially. And I believe that women in the Victorian period were looked after, and they were cherished, and they would have families, and they were happy, essentially. And that's what I think we should aim for, and that's what I think we should return to. So does that mean I hate women? No, I don't hate women at all. And we need women to make babies. I just think that it is obvious that women are destroying Western civilization. That's undeniable. Women are weak-minded, and they are collectivist by nature, and they want everything to be okay and to be friendly and nice, and then they are not confrontational. And so when the government tells them to do stuff, they'll just say yes, and they'll do it, right? And so they'll go along with anything and everything. And so they will not fight for your liberty like a man will. A man, because a man is slightly aggressive, he'll push back at the government. But women won't do that, which is probably one reason why the powers that be decided to give them the vote in the first place, because they knew that it would sedate the masses. So is it true that that women are destroying Western civilization? Yeah, it's obviously true. We ruled the world, and then we gave women the vote, and now we're being conquered by Pakistan. We've lost our empire, everything's being destroyed, we're being conquered by Pakistan, and the women don't care, essentially. They don't care, right? So this is obviously true. However, I think what needs to be done is that people need to recognize this, but not really get angry at the women, or get angry with them a little bit perhaps, but you have to fundamentally understand that this is not really their fault. It's the fault of men, because we gave them the vote. In a similar way, if you give a gun to a child, the child's going to shoot everything up. If you give a vote to a woman, she's going to destroy your civilization. So once you understand this, then you can mitigate some of that incel rage that you have against the ladies, basically. I mean, I would argue there are like 3, red pill levels, let's say. You've got the first level, which is your basic feminist man who thinks men and women are the same, and he doesn't see any problem. And then you got the red pill guy who realizes that men and women are different, and they see women's terrible, obnoxious behavior, and then they end up hating women. And then you got a level above that, which is where you understand, okay, yeah, men and women are different, and women are behaving in a terrible way, but it's not their fault because we gave them the vote, right? And in response to that, you could say, well, I didn't give them the vote, that was my ancestors. And it's like, well, that's identity politics, right? If you can't be proud of being white and be proud of white historical achievements or English historical achievements, and not at the same time also be ashamed of messing up. And we messed up, right? The white race messed up, the English race messed up, and English men specifically messed up. We made a huge mistake by giving women the vote, right? So once you understand that, then you can see through all the feminism. You should realize that we should take the vote away, but also some of your anger should just be mitigated, essentially. And following on from that point, I think in general we should just accept that it's our fault. Basically, that's the point I'm trying to get at here. Everything that's happening is our fault. Yes, we can blame it on the you-know-whos. Yes, we can blame it on women. Yes, we can blame it on homosexuals. Yes, we can blame it on brown people. But really, none of these people are destroying Western civilization. The number one enemy of Western civilization is the feminist white man, the straight white feminist man. Historically, this would be the Fabian Society, which is the real pinnacle of this. Because it's the Fabian Society that destroyed the British Empire. The British Empire represents the old world order, We are currently living in the New World Order, which means we're being ruled over by America. America is in the New World. It is a Masonic country. So the old world order, the old civilization of European dominance of the world, British dominance of the world, it was destroyed by the Fabian Society. That's really the number one enemy. It's not really even the you-know-whos. It's almost like the you-know-whos are kind of a symptom and not the cause. Because they only have power because people listen to them, essentially. Now, of course, that conspiracy goes back a lot further, and you could go back to the creation of Christianity itself, and etc., etc. Okay, it's a deeper question, and also I'm not saying we shouldn't point the finger and blame the you-know-whos. We definitely should. They are currently the world's dominant political force, and we need to point them out, right? And have a conversation about them. And yeah, obviously they've been in the background pulling strings for many, many centuries. So I'm not denying any of that. But what I am saying is that we should not fall into this kind of victim mentality of like, oh, I'm oppressed and I'm being beaten down by women and you-know-whos and brown people and all this kind of stuff. Like, we put ourselves in this position. We ruled the world and we ballsed it up and we let it slip through our fingers, and we have to take responsibility for that. And only when we take responsibility for that will we be able to solve this situation. Because until people start taking responsibility, the bullshit is just going to continue. And what I mean by that is, well, take a look at your own life, right? We all know the dissident right is filled with you-know-whos, right? I said I wouldn't name names in this video, so I'm not going to. But you all know the bullshit that's going on. And do people call it out? No, they don't call it out because they don't want to like engage in, oh, it's punching right or whatever. It's okay, so the bullshit continues. Now you got an open you-know-who on a live stream and nobody wants to say anything about it. But that was the first step for me. I complained about a American homosexual. I said, why are people listening to this homosexual guy? That got me ostracized. And then I started complaining about an American you-know-who, and that got me further ostracized. And then I started realizing, wow, I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole here, you know. It's like, and then I started complaining about some brown people, and that got me further ostracized. And it made me realize that, wow, here I am, a straight white English man, but I am less important than an American homosexual, an American you-know-who, and a brown person, and a half-caste ethot. I'm less important than all of these people in the eyes of the leaders of our movement, which allowed me, because I was honest and straightforward and I just said it how I saw it, it allowed me to finally break free from this moustache man myth and see through all the nonsense, to figure out what was going on, because I got angry and I didn't like people like shitting on the English and shitting on me, you know. So I got mad, and then the spell was broken. But why was I able to do that? Because I took responsibility and I was honest and I was straightforward. And if more people did what I did, then more people would see through all this bullshit, and then we could build an English ethno-nationalism, and then we could save this country. So what I'm saying to you, my dear friend, whoever is listening to this, what I'm saying to you is that this country is being destroyed because of you, whoever you are, because you're not taking responsibility. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and forcing you to worship Moustache Man. Nobody's doing that. The only reason this nonsense continues is because people go along with it. So don't fall into the victim mentality. Don't blame everything on women. Yes, realize that women are destroying everything, and homosexuals are destroying everything, and you-know-whos are destroying everything, and brown people. Realize all of that, but also at the same time realize the only reason they're able to do that in our country is because we are allowing them to do that, because we are stupid, basically. And everybody in the dissident right knows that the British public will never, ever, ever rally behind Moustache Man. And yet they rally behind Moustache Man. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? Who are you going to blame for that? You're going to blame George Soros? You're going to blame the Rothschilds? Who are you going to blame? Nobody else is. There is nobody else to blame but yourself. You have allowed this to happen. Okay? We, as white English men, have allowed our country to be conquered. It is our fault. Okay? So don't blame the women, essentially, is what I'm trying to say here. And that's pretty much all I got to say about the female question. I mean, when it comes to secret neo-Nazis, they basically swing between two poles. You know, you've got your insane incels who are just like screaming, whore, and we need space marine rape gangs and crazy shit like that. And then you've got your insane simps, which are just like, oh, my Aryan goddess, you are so wise, let me worship you. And they feed off each other. The incels are disgusted by the simps, and they feel that justifies their position, and the simps are disgusted by the obnoxious nature of the incels, and they feel like that justifies their simping. And it seems like nobody's got their head screwed on straight, basically. And I don't know, I mean, I'm going on a whole tangent now, but the whole manosphere is totally twisted and broken. Andrew Tate is a thief. Let me just put that out there, because this is the big subject matter of the day, the famous guy of the year. Andrew Tate is a thief. He stole money from people. He lied to people. He committed fraud. He said, he's sitting there in his Romanian brothel, and there's some guy in England, and he thought he was going to get a Romanian bride, and they just took money off them, and nothing happened. And then he bragged about it on the internet. So he is a thief, and it is disgusting that leaders rally behind him. Like, even Tucker Carlson's rallying behind this guy. It's like, what are you doing? Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, what are you doing? Tommy Robinson, what are you doing? This guy flipping converted to Islam. Born in Luton, converts to Islam. I mean, what is this guy thinking? He's like, oh yeah, I'm English, and Muslims came to my country and raped schoolgirls. Oh, I know, I'll convert to Islam. And Tommy Robinson thinks he's a great guy. Of course, he's not really English. He's a half-caste, but whatever. You see what I'm saying here? So this guy's a total piece of shit. And yet the manosphere just celebrates him. Why? Because the manosphere just cares about playboys. That's all they care about. It is a nihilistic philosophy. Their ideology is to enjoy the decline. Okay? So if you want the correct set of ideas, we need to reject the manosphere, and we need to go back to Victorian morality, and we need to celebrate essentially men's rights groups. That's the answer. This whole tradcon thing is a step in the right direction, but you can't really have a tradcon wife and a tradcon marriage if the laws are against you. You have to fix the laws. So you have to advocate for men's rights groups, give them money, promote them, and then get the laws changed. That's the solution to the sex war, basically. Anyway, the next point I'd like to mention is the grifting meme. This is a huge thing within the secret neo-Nazi movement. Basically, if anybody tries to make any money at all, then they would just be called a grifter, and like crabs in a barrel, they'll be dragged down. And this obviously prevents anyone from making any money. I mean, partly nobody can make any money because of censorship. This is also true. And they get kicked off Patreon. But solutions to this have been found a long time ago. Subscribestar has been there for a long time. Odyssey has been there for a long time now. So we've managed to work a way around the censorship problem. But the dissident right does not support its own, essentially. They don't support their own. They don't give money. They don't donate. And if anybody asks for donations, they'll just call them grifters. In my opinion, this is a psyop. It's controlled opposition again. It's anonymous people sitting in the chat, stirring up trouble, calling people greedy, or you're only in it for the money. This is another issue, actually, with the dissident right. It's very much... oh, man. I mean, this is one of the first things I noticed when I got involved. But they have a higher moral cause. Okay, I've seen this. It's a very cult-like behavior. If you have a higher moral cause, maybe like you think it could be a religious thing, or it could be whatever. Maybe you want to save the environment, whatever. In the case of white nationalists, they want to save the white race. And people do generally tend to think, I've got a higher moral cause, I'm doing this thing, therefore I can act like a complete arsehole, right? And I've seen a lot of people behave in that way. And one of the ways that this expresses itself in the dissident right is that if you do ask for money, you'll get a whole bunch of dickheads coming out and they'll say, oh, you don't really care about the white race because you're only in it for the money, whereas I'm just in it for the white race and I'm so much better than you. I'm just so morally superior to you, right? This is the kind of attitude a lot of these people have. There'll also, of course, there are a lot of like genuine grifters who will just take money off people and just blow it, right? So there's that, which is also a problem. But it all rolls into the same thing, which is that they don't like to give charity. Partly because of the PSYOP, partly because of the other problems I just mentioned, partly also because they're socialists. That's probably the biggest element here. Socialists are misers. Socialists do not believe in charity. The difference between a socialist and a capitalist is that the socialist wants the government to tax you and take your money in order to pay for the NHS or education or whatever. Whereas the capitalist believes that you should either pay for these things for yourself, or if you are poor, you should rely on charity. That's essentially the capitalist is saying, nobody's stopping you from giving charity. Like if you feel sorry for that person that can't afford surgery, give them money. Don't flipping tax me to create some completely inefficient NHS that just employs foreign people and brown people and is, a load of garbage. Don't tax me. Don't take my money and then tell me that you're being generous. But of course, a lot of people on the dissident right don't understand this, so they're very socialist, and so they've got no time at all for charity. They don't believe in generosity. They're not cultivating the virtue of generosity. They don't give. And because they don't give, the white race is being destroyed. This is one of the first points I made when I first got involved with the alt-right. The alt-right, with many reasons why the white race is dying, but one of the reasons is a lack of generosity. Because if people were more generous, then we would have an army of political activists promoting things and getting things done. Right? But nobody gives. Nobody gives money. It's not because the money isn't there. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people involved in this, and they know what's going on, but they never give any money. So we can't get any full-time political activists or political thinkers. And we can't build anything because white nationalists are misers, because they're socialists, and because they're poisoned, and it's crabs in the barrel, essentially. And like I say, this manifests itself as grift, okay? Pointing the finger. You're a grifter. You're only in it for the money. The reality of the situation is, if you want the dissident right to be successful, if you want ethno-nationalism to be successful, you need full-time political activists, full-time political journalists and intellectuals to churn out content, to talk about what's going on in the news, and to dedicate their whole lives to the subject matter. In the same way that the you-know-who's are able to do this, right? They're taking all kinds of positions in NGOs and in newspapers and in academia, where they're able to devote all of their time and energy to destroying us. White people can't do that. Why? Because white people are misers, or at least on the dissident right, they're just misers. They won't give, and so it's very difficult to push back in a serious way. So, I mean, what's the solution to this? I think, again, reject the socialism, embrace an English ethno-nationalism. Look at the example of somebody like Sargon. Again, he's actually managed to build something. And he's built it because he's talking to people who have a generous mindset, like that type of libertarian mindset, where you can give charity and where you'll pay somebody for something, essentially. So that's an important point. That's a very, very important point. This is one of the first things I recognized when I got involved in this. Way back in 2016, I had a choice. I thought maybe I could do the manosphere thing, or maybe I could do the alt-right thing. I chose the alt-right because that was the truth. That was, the thing that had to be spoken about. But I could see it was a black pit of suffering. I could see that. I could see that you get censored and nobody would help you and nobody would rally behind you and nobody would give you any money, basically. Whereas if you do a Manosphere blog or you do a CivNat blog, then you won't get censored and people will give you money, right? So who wins, right? Now, of course, you'll say, well, they're just selling out. Well, again, it's possible to give ethno-nationalists money. It's just that ethno-nationalists don't give money because they're socialists. So there you go. And then finally, last but not least, let's talk about religion. Let's talk about paganism and Christianity. This video is kind of turning into like a general critique of the dissident right in general, or white nationalism in general, and why it's failing. The Churchill point is the major point, but there are all kinds of other sub-points. But anyway, was Moustache Man a Christian? No, obviously he was not a Christian. I don't really know what to say if you think that he was. Go and look at Table Talks, where he said all kinds of terrible things about Christianity, okay? So, yeah, there's a massive war going on in the dissident right between the pagans on one side and the Christians on the other side, and each one is trying to claim Moustache Man as their own, etc., etc. I don't know, it's all very retarded and stupid. What is my opinion on the subject matter? I believe in God. I believe that love of God is the goal of life. And I believe that Christianity is good in a way because it promotes love of God as the goal of life. However, Christianity is obviously the creation of the you-know-whos. It came from their religion. The Old Testament is a history of the you-know-whos. And this whole idea that, Jesus died on the cross for our sins and what have you, I just don't really believe any of this stuff. It's been massively poisonous to Western civilization. And I think once you discover the question of the you-know-whos, it makes it very, very hard to be a Christian. So that all needs to be rejected and washed away, in my opinion. And if we want to save the white race, if we want to save the English race, we have to return to paganism, because paganism is a racial religion. And I say that because paganism is a worship of our ancestors. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the myths, if you look at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, we, the English race, we came to England from Denmark. We came over with Hengist and Horsa. And Hengist and Horsa's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was Woden. And Woden is Odin. So in my opinion, the god Woden was an ancient king who was mythologized and transformed into a god. I don't actually believe that there is a Woden somewhere floating in the sky with, two ravens and one eye and a beard and whatever. I don't believe that, but I do believe he has been made to be more than he was. Stories have been invented about him, and these stories are myths, they are our legends, and if we want to celebrate our race, you have to celebrate our history, and you have to go way back into the history, back into myth and back into legend. You don't actually have to believe that these myths and legends are real or that they happened, but you should look at them as some kind of artistic inspiration, essentially, a source of power to be drawn upon. Because Woden represents Mercury, the planet Mercury. It represents many things. So the idea is that with paganism, if you worship your ancestor, then you will remember your ancestor. And if you do that, then you will remember your history. And if you remember your history, then you will not be destroyed. The reason that we are being destroyed right now is because we have forgotten our history. And Christianity is a big part of that. So Christianity needs to be swept aside, basically, in my opinion. But having said that, I am not extremely anti-Christian. I recognize that it's a big part of our history in this country, and I see various pagans on the internet and they're raging against it, and I don't know, I just think it's slightly unproductive and antagonistic, As I said before, if you hate Christianity, then it's like you hate your great-great-grandfather, and because your grandfather was a Christian, so it's like you hate yourself. So I don't think we should hate Christianity. I think we should just outgrow it, essentially. And yeah, if we want a proper English ethno-nationalism, it should just be rooted in Wodenism, which is why I promote Woden Wednesday. Everybody should go to the pub. And a lot of people are saying, how do we rally? How do we rally our forces? How do we rally our people? Go to the pub on Wednesday, drink a pint. The pub is the heart of English society. Go there on a Wednesday and drink a pint. If everybody did that, then the pub will be full of people talking conspiracy, and it'll be great, right? So we should rally behind Woden and rally behind the English race and step over Christianity, and that is our solution. But of course, the secret neo-Nazis, they kind of mess all this up, especially the pagan ones, because this is not just their fault, but this is just, I don't know, man, like modern paganism in general, it's so mishmash, wish-wash, mixed with anthropology and archaeology, and they just, I don't know, man, it's like you see, like you read Julius Evola, right? These guys love Julius Evola. Julius Evola's books were just a hodgepodge mishmash of a whole bunch of, this culture over there did this, and that culture over there did that. It's just comparative anthropology. It's not really a celebration of our story, right? It's just comparing different pagan cultures, mishmashing them together. So this needs to be rejected. We need to look at paganism as ancestor worship, essentially. I'm not against respecting what other civilizations have done, maybe even taking some of their knowledge, that's fine. But it's our story. When we're celebrating Hengist and Horsa and Woden, we're celebrating our story, our history. That's the point. Okay? Not this vague worship of Indo-European culture, whatever the hell that means. This is like some kind of universalist approach to white culture. Oh, we're all one white culture together. No, we're not. There are many different stories within Europe, different groups of people, and we're still fighting against each other. And we can see this on this island. The British Isles is composed of 3 different white ethnicities. We have the English, we are the Anglo-Saxons, we come from Woden. You have the Welsh, right? They are the original British. They come from Brutus of Troy, who originally comes from the Trojans. And then you have the Gaelic people, that are the Irish and the Scottish, and they come from somewhere else. Basically, Goidel Glass is their ancestor, and they have a completely different mythology. So you have 3 separate white races on this island. But white nationalists and pagans, they just don't talk about this, and they don't realize it, because they like to mishmash everything together and just say, oh, you know, because they all want to be friends. They all want to be best friends. No more brother wars. And it's like, well, don't work like that, you know? There is an ethnic conflict in this country of ours. The real solution to that ancient pagan ethnic conflict would be for Prince George to marry an Irish girl. That's the real solution. So there are solutions to these problems. But you have to realize them in order to solve them, if you see what I'm saying. But whatever the case, I think that's the solution. Wodenism, celebrate that. It's mystical, it's magical, it's something which women like. Women like flowers and trees and things of that nature. They'll be attracted to it. A lot of people are complaining, no women want to join the movement. Yeah, that's because it's so dry and political. Make it flowery, right? And you also get rid of a lot of the judgmental side of things, because a lot of women just get screamed at and called whores and so on and so forth, and morally judged, you know. Whereas if you're following a religion, then you can rise above that to a certain extent. And ultimately, yeah, you need some kind of spirituality. If you move away from God and you move away from something which is transcendent, and you're just fighting for, dry materialistic race, then it's okay. It can get you so far, but it's much better to have something a little bit more magical. I think the real solution is just to mix Wodenism with a bit of Christianity, to be honest with you. Because you could just say that Woden is like the prophet of God or something like that. You can rewrite the stories. It doesn't matter. They're just stories. They just got made up. None of that stuff is real. It's artwork. That's what it is. It is an ancient artistic representation of something. You can rewrite it. So God created the world and he gave the runes to Woden. What's wrong with that? You can do that. We can do that. That's easy. You know what I mean? So I think that would be the real solution. But anyway, I'm really rambling now. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for listening. Bit of a long ramble. But like I say, I just wanted to get all my ideas in one place. A solid critique of the dissident right and all of its mistakes. There's probably a lot more I could say. I didn't even talk about Linux. So there's the last point. Use Linux. Okay. There's probably a lot more that I could say, but I just want it all in one place so you just get the right idea. And I'm thinking maybe this video itself may just be a rough draft, and maybe at some future point in time, maybe I'd like to make like a real proper serious documentary, with like proper videos and music and everything. Something that could compete with The Battle for Europa or with The Greatest Story Never Told. Maybe, I don't know. That's an idea. But anyway, there you go, guys. Alright, God bless. Thank you for listening. Please share the video with your friends. I used to have so many subscribers. I've lost them all, but they're out there somewhere. If you share it, then maybe I can find them again. Alright, God bless.